They told an entire guild I was nothing. Level 1. Useless. They never knew what level 1 could really do.
The guild hall looked the same as always, crowded, loud, smelling faintly of someone's boots drawing too close to a fire. I stood in the middle of it and listened to the man I had spent 5 years propping up explain, with impressive sincerity, why it would be better for everyone if I left. Roland had chosen the center table, the most visible seat in the hall. He covered his face with both hands and let his voice crack at exactly the right moment. The grief was immaculate. I had watched him practice concerned expressions in polished stone surfaces for at least 6 months, and by now the performance was flawless. The tremor in his voice, the careful pause before my name, the way he pressed one hand to his chest like the decision physically hurt him. He told the hall that the deep layers were too dangerous for a man whose skills were all level 1. He said he could not, in good conscience, keep risking my life for the party's convenience. He said the words agonizing decision twice. Behind him, 3 women dabbed their eyes with handkerchiefs. One of them leaned toward another and whispered about the new recruit arriving next week. 23, apparently. Handsome. Level 10 across the board. The handkerchiefs did not get any wetter after that. I had trained those 3 women from scratch. A few years back, they could not tell a mana circuit from a campfire. Now, they had leveled up under Roland's banner and caught his particular brand of vanity like a cold. I shrugged. Fair enough. I have been thinking the deep layers are getting a bit rough for me too. The tension in his jaw dissolved. I told him to keep the supplies and the tent. He clapped me on the shoulder with a grin that said the difficult part was over and he had won. And I collected my guild card from the counter and walked out into the morning air. The sunlight hit my face and I almost laughed out loud. 5 years of barriers nobody saw. Deflection routes nobody credited. Mana supply lines nobody thanked me for. 5 years of being the reason Heaven's crown had never once taken a hit in the deep layers. And the man who needed me most had just handed me my freedom because he could not read a status card past the number 1. I had enough coin from mining on my days off to live well for a very long time. No obligations, no schedule, no one else's survival depending on my planning. The slow life started right now. At the far tables, half a dozen of the guild's top-ranked adventurers sat with their ales and watched the whole performance. I did not look at them directly, but I caught the edges. One of them snorted into his drink. Another shook his head, the way a man does when he sees someone step off a cliff and call it a shortcut. They were my former students. Half the top rankers in that tavern were. I had trained them one at a time over the years, quietly, when they were stuck on skill ceilings and too proud to ask anyone else. They carried level 1 infrastructure skills spread across their own parties now, because I had taught them what that architecture was worth. They knew exactly what Roland had just thrown away. One of them muttered loud enough for me to catch on the way out. Something about how the foundation had just been pulled out from under the house. His friend laughed and said he gave it 3 months. They did not intervene. The visible evidence had not appeared yet, and contradicting the leader of the top party in public was expensive for no payoff. The rankings would do the talking soon enough. I lifted a hand without turning around. They would be fine. I was not worried about the ones who had actually paid attention. 30 minutes later, I was at the quest counter looking for solo mining runs when the argument at the next window pulled my attention sideways. 3 women were being turned down. An elf with long pale hair and the kind of posture that said every thought she had arrived fully sharpened. A holy knight with dark waves of hair, a sword on her hip, and a stare that could strip paint off a wall. A beastkin woman who stood 2 heads taller than either of them, wolf ears flat with frustration, her tail rigid behind her. Their skills were capped at level 5 across the board. No high-rank party would take them. The quests they needed were deep layer runs, and deep layer runs required the right support structure. They had talent to spare, and nowhere to spend it. A pack of bottom feeders at a nearby table offered suggestions, loudly, crudely, and with the creativity of men who had never needed to be interesting. Something about how the recently expelled solo adventurer at the next window might follow them if they asked nicely enough. The elf's lip curled. The knight's hand found her sword hilt. The beastkin growled low enough that the nearest table went quiet. The receptionist, who happened to be one of the few people in the guild who understood what I actually did, caught my eye and leaned forward with the urgency of someone defusing a bomb. She told the 3 women that I had been to the deepest floors of the Felwy Grand Labyrinth multiple times, that I could operate entirely solo, and that this was a rare opportunity they should not pass up. Her intensity surprised even me. The women studied me. Their expressions ranged from skeptical to insulted. I was a scrawny man with level 1 on every line of my guild card, and I did not look like I could carry a pack uphill, let alone guide anyone through a dungeon. She is making me sound impressive, I said. I am really not, but if you need a guide, I am available. One run, temporary, no complications. Elise, the elf, narrowed her eyes like she was dissecting something she had not yet classified as alive or dead. Serena, the knight, did not remove her hand from her sword. Mira, the beastkin, tilted her head, studied me for a long moment, and then her ears perked up. They agreed. The consensus was roughly, he is too thin to be a physical threat, and we have no other options. I could work with that. Hours into the labyrinth, the adjustment happened without anyone announcing it. The detection device clipped to my belt was something I had built myself. Level 1 detection, filtered through a hand-tuned magic tool, pushed the effective sensitivity up to about a 3. Pair that with years of learning how sound moved in these corridors, and I could call species, count, and direction before anything rounded a corner. 3 contacts behind the right column. Goblins, from the footfall pattern. 1 slime on the ceiling, dropping in 4 seconds. I kept my voice even. Elise, ice on the puddle at the base. Serena, sweep the goblins when they slip. Mira, look up. They moved. Elise's ice spread across the ground in a clean sheet. The goblins skidded into Serena's blade. Mira caught the falling slime mid-air with a clawed fist and slammed it into the wall hard enough to crack the stone. 3 fights, 4 fights, 10. The same pattern. I called, they executed. Nothing touched them that I had not already mapped. Elise was the first to notice something was wrong. She had fired level 5 magic a dozen times, and her mana pool had barely dipped. She looked at me with the expression of someone who has opened a box and found it deeper than it should be. The lantern hanging from my belt was the reason. It projected a mana conservation and slow recovery field across the party. I had built it to handle Heaven's Crown's waste. For 3 women who actually knew how to fight, it was like removing a weight they had not known they were carrying. Serena fought cleaner by the hour, not because she improved, because my healing pulses caught her between swings, erasing the micro-fatigue that had been dragging her 3rd strike in every combination. She did not know I was doing it. She just felt sharper. Mira did what Mira did. She charged, she hit things, she grinned while doing it. The difference was that every corridor I routed her through had a clean fallback. Every engagement ended with space to breathe. She fought like an animal who had been let off a leash for the first time, and for once, the leash had been the dungeon, not her. I was not making them stronger. I was removing the friction that had been wasting what they already had. When I called it for the night, I could see the dread settle on their faces. Dungeon camping, cold stone, no privacy, wet clothes, and whatever food you remembered to bring. They had done this before. They were bracing for it. I built the shelter while we walked. Level 1 earth magic. Stone rose from the dungeon floor in clean sections. Walls first, then ceiling, then interior partitions. Soundproofing barrier on the exterior. I routed a hot spring line from the geological vein 40 paces behind the eastern wall. By the time they stepped through the entrance, there was a steaming bath, soft bedding, and a pot of stew made from a chef friend's level 10 provisions, heated and finished with my level 1 cooking. The 3 of them stopped in the doorway. Food is hot and the bath is ready, I said. Get in before the water cools. I will keep watch. Mira's tail went from drooping to swinging so hard it thumped the wall. She crossed the room in 3 strides, planted herself at the stew, and did not come up for air. Her ears were flat against her skull in what I would learn was her expression for pure, unfiltered happiness. Boss! She spoke with her mouth still half full. This stew is incredible. The meat just melts. The ingredients are good. I just heated them properly. You are my boss now. Permanently, I have decided. Serena emerged from the bath later with her shirt deliberately open and a gaze sharp enough to qualify as a weapon. She sat down next to me with the specific kind of proximity that was supposed to mean something. I had seen this before, from soldiers testing a new officer. Check whether he can be manipulated. Check whether he is a threat. I reached for my pack. She tensed. I pulled out a heavy wool blanket and draped it around her shoulders. The dungeon drops 10 degrees at night, I said. You will catch a cold with wet hair. Wrap up. Her hand had been on her sword hilt under the table. It went still. She stared at me for a long time, then pulled the blanket tighter and went to bed without a word. Elise watched the entire thing from across the room. I could feel her running calculations. She had started the day looking at me like an unwanted prescription. Now she was looking at me the way she looked at locked doors. Not warmly, just with focus. That was probably a problem. I decided not to think about it. I was adjusting the lantern near the entrance when Elise materialized beside me. The other 2 were asleep. Mira had curled into a ball so large it occupied most of the floor. Serena had not moved since the blanket. Elise leaned forward until her face was inches from mine. Elf eyes catch light differently at night. Hers had a faint silver pattern that I noticed because I noticed everything, and that was exactly the kind of detail I should stop cataloging. Tell me the truth. Her voice was ice and curiosity mixed in equal parts. You have not touched us. You have not looked. Are you genuinely harmless or just a coward? I blinked. Is something wrong? Can you not sleep? I have wine somewhere. Or something lighter, if wine is no good. The silence stretched. She leaned back half an inch. Never mind. A sigh. You really are like this. Like what? Like a father at a sleepover who keeps checking if everyone has enough blankets. Is that bad? She did not answer. I stood up because I had a job to finish before I could sleep. I need to drain my mana. It will take a few minutes. Not very exciting. I stepped into the tunnel outside the shelter and started the ritual. Earth magic, level 1. Miniature stone structures. I conjured them as fast as my hands could move. Castles, arches, towers, walls. Each one rose in a heartbeat and dissolved a second later. Build, collapse, build, collapse. The principle was simple. Deplete the mana pool to 0. Let it refill. Deplete it again. Compress years of natural growth into months. The constructions blurred together. Dozens, hundreds. The pool was enormous now, far beyond what any level 1 caster should have, and emptying it took genuine effort. My hands did not stop. When the last castle crumbled, I hit the floor. All empty. I set it to the ceiling. Good night. I was asleep before my head settled against the stone. Elise stood in the doorway. I did not see her face. I was told later she put a blanket over me before going back to bed. The point was not the blanket. The point was that she had seen it, the ritual, the scale of the mana pool, the sheer discipline of someone doing this alone every night for years with no audience and no explanation. She would not forget it. I did not know yet what that would cost me. Same night, different part of the labyrinth, a different world entirely. Bram was fighting alone. He had been fighting alone since the expedition started. Heaven's Crown's approach to their newest recruit was straightforward. Bram cleared the path. Roland held a shield at the rear. The 3 women walked between them and contributed nothing. When Bram asked for cover, they told him the Vanguard's job was the Vanguard's job. When he asked for mana support, they laughed. He had level 10 fire magic, powerful enough to flatten corridors, spectacularly expensive to cast, and no one in the party cared about that because mana management had been my department. I was not there anymore. Monsters came in waves. Bram burned through them on raw power and collapsing reserves. By the 3rd wave, he was on his knees and running on fumes. He begged for backup. Roland told him to keep clearing. One of the women said something about how male level 10 casters were such a waste of mana. Then the dungeon taught them what happened without detection support. Creatures dropped from the ceiling behind the rear line. No warning, no time. The women screamed and fired level 10 spells in every direction. 3 of them, full power, in a tunnel that could barely contain one. The blast ripped through the monsters, and then through the walls, and then through their own formation. The healer's mana was gone. The tunnel was half collapsed. Their party lay in the rubble, bleeding, drained, unable to move. Bram stood in the smoke and looked at the top party that had promised him glory. Something in him snapped clean. He spat blood onto the stone. He called them what they were, incompetent, a rabble with no right to call themselves ranked adventurers. His voice cracked off the broken walls and came back to him sounding like a man who had decided that dying for Roland's ambition was not a trade he would ever make again. Then he turned his back on them and walked into the dark. Somewhere ahead of him, in a warm stone shelter with cooling bathwater and the last traces of good stew, I was asleep on the floor with a blanket draped over me and a mana pool sitting at absolute 0. I did not know Bram existed yet. I would. I woke up with my mana tank halfway full and a crick in my neck that proved stone floors do not improve with practice. The shelter was already bright. Elise sat on a rock ledge watching me the way she watched everything, like I was a problem she had not finished solving. Serena cleaned her sword. Mira ate leftover stew cold, tail swaying. I started packing, reversed the spell, let the earth settle back. I was rolling the lantern's cord when Elise spoke. I have a question. Go ahead. Why do you not see us as women? Behind her, Serena's hand stopped on the blade. Mira's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. The shelter got very quiet very fast. I set the lantern down. Honesty was the only option that would not insult them. That is not even close to the issue, I said. You are beautiful, all 3 of you. Elise, you are the kind of person artists spend careers trying to capture. Serena, You carry yourself like a general who happens to be stunning enough to stop a room. Mira, you have more honest vitality than anyone I have ever met. Looking directly at any of you for too long requires discipline I would rather not test. 3 faces turned shades of red I had not thought skin could produce. But in a dungeon, you are my party members. I owe you my full judgment, undistorted. If I favored one of you, the balance breaks. Jealousy gets into the gaps. Hesitation follows. Then someone dies because of a feeling I could have controlled. Serena's voice still shook. And after, when the run is over, same rule, same party, same principle. I will not be the reason a team falls apart. They hated the logic and respected the man behind it in equal measure. Elise smiled, very faintly, and said nothing. Good. Now, yesterday's combat showed me where your gaps are, and they are fixable. Let me teach you what level 1 skills can actually do when you pair them with the right tools and the right mana discipline. The lesson took the better part of an hour. I walked them through 5 years of refinement, how a level 1 spell cast with perfect efficiency could outperform a sloppy level 5, how mana conservation meant spending precisely rather than spending less. Their eyes lit up with the particular light that comes when someone realizes the ceiling they thought was fixed is actually a floor. We packed the last of the gear and headed deeper. We found them half a corridor ahead. Bram was in front, which was the only reason any of them were still moving. Blood at the corner of his mouth, soot on his arms, exhaustion in his eyes that went deeper than the body. Behind him, Roland and the 3 women of Heaven's Crown sat propped against the walls like wreckage after a flood, too proud to call for help and too broken to walk without it. Their mana was gone. Their healer could not cast. Bram saw me first. Something in his face cracked open. Not weakness, just relief so intense it looked like pain. You are the one they kicked out. Ethan, right? He did not wait for confirmation. Everything poured out in clipped, furious bursts. No detection support, no coordination. He had been their vanguard, their mana battery, and their punching bag. They had fired level 10 spells into a tunnel he was standing in. Their leader had held a shield in the back and contributed nothing. I listened. Comfort was not what he needed. What he needed was to say it to someone who understood why it had happened. Yeah, I said when he finished. That tracks. Behind him, Roland and the women would not meet my eyes. They wanted help but could not ask for it. Not a day after their leader had explained with rehearsed sincerity why removing me was for the greater good. I did not wait for them to ask. Hold still. You are all bleeding enough to draw every monster in this corridor, and I would rather not deal with that on top of everything else. I touched the healing artifact on my belt and pushed level 1 recovery magic through it. Brute mana volume compensating for low ceiling. The artifact amplified the reach. I widened the field to cover all of them and held it steady. Deep lacerations closed, fractures knit. Color returned to faces that had gone gray. Elise watched from behind me, calculating. She had seen me drain my entire pool to 0 last night. 1 sleep later, I was restoring 5 people from critical condition. The numbers did not fit any framework she knew. Roland stared at the light fading from his healed wounds. In 5 years together, my barriers had kept them from ever needing healing. He had never seen this skill because I had made sure the situation never arose. There, everyone can walk now. We are heading to the deep floor. You should get back to the surface. Bram bowed, deep and genuine. I owe you. Once I get back to town, I am leaving their party for good. Let me find you after. I want to repay this properly. Do not worry about it. Get home safe. He nodded once, hard, then shot a glare at Roland's group that could have etched glass. He turned toward the exit. Roland and the others followed without a word, without the smallest acknowledgement that the man they had expelled had just saved them from dying in a corridor. He has something, I said, almost to myself. That kid's mana signature. It is level 10 combat magic on a frame with 0 support architecture. Enormous ceiling, no foundation. Somebody points him in the right direction and he will be terrifying. Elise tilted her head. You sound like you are already planning his curriculum. I am not. I was. We reached the bottom floor in roughly the time it would take most parties to clear the entrance. The women were better today. The morning lesson had already changed how Serena timed her strikes, how Mira read engagement flow, how Elise managed her mana. Small adjustments at their level compounded fast. The deep floor opened into a raw geological chamber, walls slick with mineral deposits that caught the lantern light in pale blue and black veined streaks. All right, I said, rolling up my sleeves. Main event. Mira's ears perked. Boss, what are we doing down here? I fitted the monocle, another custom artifact paired to my appraisal skill, and scanned the rock face. Level 1 appraisal only identified common metals. Anything that came back unidentifiable meant the deposit exceeded what a level 1 skill could categorize, which in practice meant it was worth more than most adventurers earned in a lifetime. Mining, I said. Watch. I cast level 1 earth magic at the point the monocle flagged. The stone around the deposit crumbled to powder, obedient and precise. What remained, what the spell could not touch, because it was harder than anything level 1 force could affect, dropped to the ground with a clean metallic ring, a chunk of pale blue metal, dense and luminous, mithril. Next to it, a black mass with an internal sheen like captured starlight, orichalcum. I picked them both up the way you pick up interesting rocks on a beach and dropped them into my expansion bag. Then I moved to the next vein. That one is mithril too. And this, yeah, more orichalcum. Nice cluster. Behind me, 3 women stood in absolute silence. Normal mithril extraction required a team of dwarven miners working with enchanted pickaxes for days, hacking through bedrock at the risk of tunnel collapse, cave-ins, and the deep-level monsters that the noise attracted. It was a national-scale operation. I had just pulled 2 of the rarest metals in the world out of a wall using the same spell that built last night's shelter. The surrounding rock fell away. The treasure stayed, like picking fruit. I filled the bag and dusted off my hands. The guild clerk shook his head when I set the haul on the counter. He was used to me. Years of solo deep runs during Heaven's Crowns off days. Quiet deposits at the counter while the rest drank. The clerk processed the exchange and pushed a stack of payment across the counter that made the adventurers in line behind me stop talking. I divided it into 4 equal shares and set them in front of the women. Elise looked at the gold, then at me, then back at the gold. This is a mistake. It is not. Serena nodded firmly. Mira pushed her pile back toward me. Something in my chest tightened. Not anger, exactly. Something older. Take it. My voice came out low and flat in a way that stopped all 3 of them cold. They had not heard this register from me before. We went into that dungeon as 4 people. We operated as one party. Contribution is not measured by who swung the hardest. It is measured by the fact that you were there, watching my back, keeping formation, learning under pressure. If you refuse an equal share, you are telling me this was not a real party. And if it was not a real party, then I have no reason to run with you again. The guild hall had gone very quiet around us. Serena took her share first, hands trembling slightly. Mira grabbed hers with both arms and held it to her chest, like a child protecting something precious. Elise picked hers up last, carefully, and met my eyes with an expression I could not fully read. Understood, she said softly. The tension broke. I felt the knot in my chest loosen. Good, let us go eat. We made it 3 steps toward the door before the shouting started. Master, I have been looking everywhere for you, Master. I closed my eyes briefly. Oh no, Bram. Of course it was Bram. He had gone back to town, formally quit Roland's party, and spent the rest of the day interviewing every veteran adventurer in Herafutin about my history. He now knew about the top rankers I had trained, the solo deep runs, every record Heaven's Crown had set on support architecture that no longer existed. He planted himself in front of me like a man delivering an oath. I know everything. You trained the best adventurers in this city. You are the reason Heaven's Crown ever reached the deep floors. Take me as your disciple. Absolutely not. I'm trying to retire. And stop calling me that. It is embarrassing. Understood, Master. I will follow you forever, Master. He did not leave. I did not lock the door when I walked away. In Bram's framework, that was acceptance enough. Serena laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from a place she had not expected to visit today, and slung an arm around my neck in a hug that pressed her armor against my shoulder. You have had quite a day. Boss! Mira launched herself from the side. I caught her on reflex, which was the only reason we both stayed standing. I endured the gratitude with the patience of a man who has realized that protesting will only extend it. Then Elise stepped forward. She did not grab. She did not tackle. She placed her arms around me gently, the way you hold something you have decided to keep, and rested her head against my chest. Her hair smelled like winter air over clean water. For exactly 1 heartbeat, my pulse jumped. 1 involuntary tension through my shoulders. 1 crack in the professional architecture I had spent the entire morning defending. She felt it. I knew she felt it because when she pulled back, her expression had changed. The analytical mask was still there, but underneath it, just barely visible, just for a fraction of a second, was something triumphant. Something that said she had found the answer to a question she had been asking since yesterday. She said nothing. She smiled and walked away. I had no idea what had just happened. Bram was tugging on my sleeve, demanding I buy him dinner. The quiet life I had planned was getting louder by the hour. The guild tavern was doing what it always did at midday. Loud, packed, smelling like grilled meat, and someone's boots drawing too close to the hearth. We had a table near the center, and every man in the room was pretending not to stare at the 3 women sitting with me. Serena carried herself like the knight she was. Mira grinned at her food with the energy of someone who had never once cared about impressions. And Elise sat across from me, controlled as always, watching men's eyes freeze on her face and then drift downward to the modest silhouette beneath her robes. The moment they registered it, they looked at Serena instead. Elise's fist tightened under the table. She thought no one noticed. I noticed. That was the problem with me. She caught me watching and the ice softened by 1 degree, more alarming than the fist. "This skewer is excellent," I said, because that was safe. In the dim corner, a different table carried a different atmosphere. Heaven's Crown sat hunched over their drinks. After Bram's public departure and the dungeon collapse story, no serious adventurer would join them. They had dropped their recruitment standards and were looking for someone young and desperate enough not to ask questions. A girl sat at their table, 21, maybe. Short dark hair, quiet eyes, a short blade at her hip. She asked, barely audible, whether someone like her was really good enough. The leader smiled his practiced smile and told her not to worry. I did not know her name yet, but I had seen her file at the guild registry. 5 level 4 skills: short blade, water magic, purification, evasion, trap technique. Every point distributed with the kind of efficiency that suggested she understood resource management on an intuitive level. She was not a jack of all trades. She was a versatile specialist who had never been given the architecture to prove it, and she had just walked into the worst possible party to demonstrate anything. Back at my workshop, we spread parchment across the table. I had the full skill assessment ready, my 35 level 1 skills, the women's level 5 specializations, with newly added support supplements, Bram's 2 level 10 pillars bridged by 3 carefully placed level 1 skills. The logic was simple. Everyone chased the next big spell and ignored the cheap support skills that would triple their efficiency. 1 point in mana conservation, 1 in mana recovery. A level 5 caster who ran dry after 3 spells could suddenly sustain a full corridor fight. Serena flexed her hand after the adjustment. "It feels like my whole body just unlocked." Elise said nothing, but the faint luminescence in her eyes told me she understood exactly what had changed. Then Bram leaned forward. "Master, could you look at someone else too? There is a girl in the old party, Lahi. They do not see what she actually is." I turned to a page I had already filled in. Already done. 5 level 4 skills, 22 total points. Careful, deliberate distribution. Completely wasted in a party that did not know what to do with a utility fighter. Bram stared. "You already had this written? She trains her mana pool to exhaustion every night, alone. No guidance, just instinct." I set the quill down. I have seen that method before. The room went quiet. Elise watched me with an expression I chose not to examine. "Her ceiling is enormous," I said. "With proper support, she could anchor deep floor operations by herself. That old group will never see it. They will use her up and blame her when things break. I assign nightly mana exhaustion to everyone. Full drain before sleep. Build the foundation no status screen would ever measure." Bram saluted. Elise smiled and kept watching. She had figured out, I suspected, that my offer to teach her a more efficient mana method was going to involve proximity she had been engineering toward for days. I pretended I had not figured out that she had figured that out. Somewhere in the labyrinth, several floors down from anywhere safe, a girl I had never spoken to was running the same drill I had run for years, alone, without knowing why it worked. A few days passed. We drilled at the workshop, letting the new skills settle into muscle memory. It was almost peaceful. Lahi did not get peaceful. Heaven's Crown had gone back into the labyrinth with their new recruit exactly where I predicted. Frontline, alone. No barriers, no mana supply, no coordination. She was the scout, the vanguard, and the only member actually fighting. Behind her, 3 women threw level 10 spells at whatever moved and missed half the time. Their leader hid behind his shield and called it protecting the rear. Lahi killed everything that reached her. Short blade and water magic. Efficient and precise. She was better than all 4 of them combined, and none of them could see it. The leader saw something else. He saw that she was young and attractive, and he responded exactly the way a man like him would. The wandering eyes, the unnecessary touches, the excuses to stand close. At night, Lahi sat outside on watch, while the rest of the party occupied themselves in ways I will not describe. Every night, alone, draining her mana in the dark because there was nothing else to do. She had already decided to quit. She was counting the hours until they surfaced. The labyrinth did not give her those hours. members. That afternoon, orcs from the front. Lahi called for shield support. The leader ducked. The women panicked and fired their most expensive spells in every direction without checking where their own people stood. The blast caught the wall. The wall came down. Behind it was a second passage, and behind that, a second wave. Front and back. No exit. No mana. Lahi's legs gave out against the stone she had been thrown into. She closed her eyes. Elise, there's a mushroom cluster behind that rock. Grab a few for the alchemy stock. Certainly, she paused. It sounds rather noisy up ahead. We came through the secondary corridor I had mapped months ago. Level 1 detection to find. Level 1 earth magic to unseal. Most parties walked right past it. Dust still settling. Monster corpses mixed with living ones. 4 members of Heaven's Crown on the ground. And 1 girl slumped against the far wall, bleeding, her blade still in her hand. Mira, clear the front. She moved through the orc pack like wind through paper. 3 seconds. 5 orcs. She did not look winded. Lahi opened her eyes. I watched the disbelief cross her face. Those idiots got flanked again. Bram rested his sword on his shoulder. Unbelievable. I walked to Lahi and handed her a recovery potion from my belt. Drink this. She stared at me, then drank. The color returned to her face in seconds. The girl who had been ready to die was looking at us like we were something impossible. Master, let me handle the breach. I placed my hand on Bram's shoulder. Direct mana transfer. My pool feeding into his, steady and controlled. The old Bram would have detonated the corridor. Level 10 fire with no throttle, no targeting. Burn everything. That was what Heaven's Crown taught him. The new Bram read the monster cluster through mana detection, trimmed the fire to exactly the width of his blade, stepped in, swung once. A single arc of controlled flame cut through the breach like a surgical line. Every monster dropped. The walls held. Not a spark touched Lahi or anyone behind him. He sheathed his sword, clean, precise, beautiful if I was being honest, which I rarely was about my students. Not bad, I said. Bram turned to Lahi and offered his hand. You okay? Take your time. She took it. Her cheeks were red, and it was not from the injuries. I let the moment breathe. Then I turned to Heaven's Crown. The leader and his companions sat on the ground, staring at Bram like they had never seen him before. They had not. They had never looked at what he actually was. I sealed the wall with earth magic, ran a healing pass over all 4 of them. Standard procedure. Leaving injured people in a dungeon was not something I was built to do, regardless of who they were. The leader stood up and started shouting. The gist was that everything was Lahi's fault. She had failed to detect the threat. She had failed to protect them. If she had done her job, none of this would have happened. He was pointing at a girl who had single-handedly kept his party alive for days while he hid behind a shield. I looked at him for a long moment. Right, I said. Good luck with that. I turned to my group. Let us move on. We walked. Behind me, Lahi stood in the corridor between 2 versions of what a party could be. A few days later, the guild counter saw a transaction that surprised no one who had been paying attention. Lahi stood in front of the leader and dropped a leather pouch of silver coins at his feet. Penalty fee, full amount. She said 2 sentences. She was leaving the party, effective immediately. She had determined that staying would result in her death. The leader exploded. He called her ungrateful. He told her no other party would take a jack of all trades with nothing above level 4. He said they had done her a favor by letting her in at all. Lahi looked at him with the flat, empty expression of someone who had already left. She turned and walked into the guild tavern. We were eating. Bram was talking with his mouth full. Mira was stealing from Serena's plate. Elise was pretending to read a document while watching me with the focus of a hawk calculating its descent angle. Lahi walked straight to our table and bowed so deeply I thought she would hit the wood. Please, let me join your party. I will do anything, whatever you need. Please. Bram lit up. Hey, it is the girl from the dungeon. Elise glanced at me. Mira stopped chewing, which for Mira was a standing ovation of attention. I looked at Lahi. She was shaking. The bow was not performance. It was the posture of someone who had spent weeks being treated as disposable and had decided, on her own terms, that she was worth more than that. I had read her file. I had watched her fight. I had seen her train alone in the dark. Yes, I said. Welcome. Her eyes were wet. She opened her mouth and nothing came out. Bram pulled a chair over. Sit down. You hungry? Master's buying. I did not agree to that, I said. You were going to, Elise said. And she was right, which was the most irritating thing about her. Lahi sat. Mira pushed a plate toward her. Serena poured her a drink. Bram launched into the training schedule with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for a new audience. The party was 6. 3 women too talented for the positions the world had given them. A young man who had been used as a shield until he found someone who saw his ceiling. A quiet girl who had been treated as expendable until she walked away on her own terms. And me, the man with 35 5 level 1 skills who had been told in front of the entire guild that he was a liability. I took a bite of my skewer. The morning light was warm. My retirement was getting further away by the hour, and I could not find the energy to mind. A few days after Lahi joined, my workshop looked less like a workshop and more like a classroom that had lost control of its students. Bram had appointed himself senior instructor. He stood over Lahi at the work table, holding up a boot brush like a holy relic. "The most important thing our leader ever taught me," he said, "is not some flashy combat spell. It is this: gear maintenance, the boring stuff that keeps you alive." Lahi watched him with the focus of someone who had never been taught anything gently. When he fumbled a strap buckle and tried to play it off, she smiled for the first time since joining. I stepped in. 80% of a dungeon run is decided before you draw a weapon. Boot mud, blade chips, pack balance down to the finger width. Those fractions compound. I showed her the cleaning and repair process, turning out restored gear like an assembly line. She said, quietly, that nobody had ever told her maintenance mattered. I recognized the tone. It was mine, from a long time ago. Then I laid out individual plans for all 5. Bram needed a conservation layer on his fire magic. Serena's night framework could absorb 2 supplements that would double her endurance. Mira's monocycling was leaking energy. Elise needed less optimization and more authority, so I formalized her into running field tactics. For Lahi, I assigned mana conservation and mana recovery. Once those settled, her 5 level 4 skills would stop burning out, and the real ceiling would appear. "When you have enough skill points," I told her, "I will teach you stealth or ranged accuracy. But first, I want to see you fight so I can read which one fits." She snapped a salute so crisp it startled Bram. "Yes, sir. Not sir. Just Ethan." The two of them whispered to each other afterward, eyes bright, bonding with the ease of people who survived the same wreckage. Meanwhile, the 3 women had spent the session competing for proximity to my end of the table. Serena kept leaning across me for tools. Mira parked at my elbow and refused to move. Elise watched from across the table with an expression that would have frozen a lesser man solid. I pretended not to notice. Professional environment. The dungeon runs became routine in the best possible way. I never swung a sword. By the time the party met anything hostile, I had mapped it with detection magic, set earth traps, and layered everyone with buffs. Bram and Serena killed. Mira covered flanks. Elise called formations. Lahi held the rear with quiet discipline that reminded me of watching a mirror. After one clean sweep, Elise was staring at me from 3 paces away. Those silver violet eyes could strip paint. "Something wrong?" I asked. "Hungry?" "I was admiring your command decisions." "Appreciated." Serena attached herself to my right arm. Mira hit my left side with the force of a friendly avalanche. I could not breathe. I said so. Nobody cared. Elise peeled them off, then positioned herself 4 inches from my face. Her breath was warm. My brain stopped for reasons I chose not to investigate. "We should discuss the party name," she said. The tension collapsed so completely that Lahi and Bram tripped over their own feet behind us. I built the shelter in 4 seconds flat. Soundproofed walls, stone table, conjured flame overhead. The naming meeting began. Mira proposed something that translated to the Full Belly Brigade. Completely serious, tail wagging. "I appreciate the enthusiasm," I said, "but I would rather not announce that at a guild counter." Serena suggested a name involving indomitable and silver and justice. It sounded like something chiseled into a military monument. "We are freelance adventurers, not a battalion." Bram's eyes lit up. "The master and his amazing apprentices. Go outside and cool your head." Lahi offered something functional and forgettable, like a government filing code. Too practical. Everyone looked at me. I suggested a name about different flowers blooming in their own way, each beautiful for what it was. The idea was simple. They were all different. None of them needed to be anything else. I just wanted them to grow. Mira burst into tears and launched herself at me. Even Serena softened. Then Elise spoke. She had been quiet the entire time. "Your idea is beautiful, but the phrasing might be hard for the guild to remember." She paused. "What about Dawn's Perch?" The room went still. "We were all lost in the dark," she said, looking directly at me. "You were the dawn, and this is the perch where we rest before we fly again." Nobody argued. The name was not clever. It was not flashy. It was simply precisely right. She had named what I was doing before I had found the words for it myself. "Good name," I said, after a silence that lasted longer than I intended. No objections. The shelter erupted. Bram shouted the name at the ceiling. Mira howled. Lahi had tears on her face and did not seem to know they were there. I sat against the stone wall and thought, for reasons I could not explain, that I should write this down somewhere. The romantic campaigns did not stop. If anything, the party name gave them momentum. Serena struck first. She had acquired a skill called provocation, designed to force a target's attention onto the user. Normally, you aimed it at monsters. She aimed it at me during a rest break, leaned in with her full arsenal on display, and asked if I could work the tension out of her shoulders. I felt the skill hit, a faint tug at my awareness, something redirecting focus. But I was already looking at her chest plate. The lower left clasp was loose. A gap like that in the deep floors was the difference between a bruise and a punctured lung. Hold still. I tightened the clasp, tested the give, and walked away to check the fire. Behind me, I heard what sounded like a woman's soul leaving her body. Mira appeared at my side whenever I cooked, tail going like a metronome set to maximum. I have decided, she announced one evening, to become even stronger. For you, strength training and meal prep are separate activities. She ignored this and launched into an explanation of beastkin physiology I did not need and could not unhear. Her sincerity was total, not a single dishonest bone in her body. I patted her head. My hand brushed one of her ears. The sound she made was not a word in any language. She went boneless against my knee, face red, ears twitching. Coming down with something? More, she whispered. Touch the ears more. I cleaned the dust off the ear tip because it looked dirty. This produced a reaction I am choosing not to describe. Elise and Serena materialized from nowhere, and the rest of the evening was loud. Elise was the one I could not file away. Serena's provocation bounced off because I was thinking about armor integrity. Mira registered as a medical concern. Both responses were genuine. I was not pretending. But Elise. She came to my workroom one night in something thin, said she needed a reference from my notes, and stood close enough that I could feel heat coming off her skin. I told her to put on something warmer. Then she tripped on a tool casing. I caught her. She landed against my chest, and every wall in my head cracked, just slightly. The feeling was not overwhelming or aggressive. It was quiet, warm. The particular kind of softness a man who has been tired for a very long time does not know how to defend against. I stammered an apology. She left. I sat alone afterward, thinking about the fact that I could still feel where she had been. That night, I drained my entire mana pool into the floor. 300 stone pillars built and dissolved, one after another, until my body gave out, unconscious before my head hit the pillow. It was not avoidance. It was a training schedule. The timing was coincidental. I almost believed that. Registration day. I filled out the form and slid the quill to Elise. Leader line, sign here. Why me? Because I am a level 1 handyman. You are the obvious choice. The refusal was instant, unanimous, absolute. 5 voices at once. Elise snatched the quill, wrote my name in the leader field in handwriting nicer than anything I had ever produced, and handed it to the clerk before I could object. You lead us. Her voice could have frozen a lake. There is no alternative. Mira's ears perked. Then Elise should be sub-leader. Elise's composure shattered. She turned red to the tips of her pointed ears and tried to push the role onto Serena, citing noble birth and military rank. Serena declined with a smile, calculated to the millimeter. She wanted Elise buried in paperwork. Bram and Lahi clapped. The clerk stamped the form. Dawn's Perch. Leader, Ethan. Sub-leader, Elise. Official. We walked out into the morning air as a party with a name, a chain of command, and a future I had not planned for. Bram punched the sky. Mira howled. Lottie walked half a step behind, wearing an expression I recognized because I had been wearing it myself for days and refusing to name it. Elise fell into step beside me, close, not touching. Not bad, she said, for a handyman. My slow life was getting further away by the day, and for reasons I would deal with later or never, that bothered me less than it should have. The dwarf set the gear on the counter without ceremony. Serena's shield had been rebalanced to the millimeter. Mira's claws had been reground in high conductivity steel. The old man grunted something about treating them well and went back to his forge. Serena lifted the shield and her eyes changed. The weight pulls right into my hand, she said quietly, turning it over. This is flawless. Mira slashed the air once, and her whole face lit up. I can move so much faster with these. Both of them turned their gratitude on me at the same time, which was the professional equivalent of a pincer attack. Serena took my right arm. Mira took my left. The grip strength of 2 top-ranked adventurers is not something a level 1 body can contest, and I was marched to the training grounds like a prisoner being escorted to sentencing. Every adventurer on the street stared. I stared at the sky and prayed for a quick death. Elise, Bram, and Lahi were already waiting when we arrived. Elise's expression dropped a few degrees when she saw the arm arrangement, but Serena and Mira released me with the smooth professionalism of people who had accomplished exactly what they intended. I drew my sword. The multi-tool blade felt right in my hand, the way it always did. Today, I need all 5 of you to come at me at once. I kept my voice even, no holding back. Imagine I am something that wants to kill you in the deep floors. Try to put me down. 5 faces stared back at me. Bram shifted his weight. Serena's fingers tightened on her new shield. Mira's ears flattened. Then everyone moved. Bram swung his fire-wreathed greatsword from the left. Serena charged with her shield raised, thunder cracking behind her. In the back line, Elise was building something enormous out of ice magic, the air around her crystallizing white. I spoke one word, and a pinpoint ridge of earth bucked upward beneath Serena's lead foot. Her stance broke. She stumbled sideways, and her charge died. Before Bram's blade reached the bottom of its arc, a pea-sized fireball detonated an inch from his eyes. No damage. Enough flash to buy me a full second. That was the lesson, and none of them understood it yet. Level 10 magic needs buildup. The power has to gather. The caster has to commit. The activation sequence has to complete before the spell releases. Every high-level skill in this world works the same way. The stronger the output, the longer the wind-up. Level 1 skills fire the instant I think them. No build-up, no commitment window, no gap between deciding and doing. Mira lunged. I redirected her momentum with a stone lip she never saw forming under her foot. Bram recovered and swung again. I jammed his vision with another flash, sidestepped, and tapped the back of his knee with the flat of my blade. He went down hard. Lahi tried to flank. I had already read her angle through detection and placed a low wall of earth exactly where her foot needed to land. She tripped and rolled. Elise was the last one standing. Her ice magic was fully formed now, a massive lance of frozen air aimed straight at me, but I had been feeding tiny pulses of fire into her casting matrix since she started building it. Not enough to notice, enough to destabilize. When she released, the lance shattered 3 feet from her hands. Her eyes went wide. I was behind her before she processed what had happened. The flat of my blade rested against the side of her neck, cold steel on warm skin. The only real advantage of level 1 skills, I said, is that they have 0 wind-up. In the time it takes any of you to commit to one attack, I can act 30 times. That is what keeps you alive on the deep floors. Speed of execution, not magnitude of force. I sheathed the blade and offered my hand to the nearest person on the ground, which happened to be Bram. He took it with the expression of someone who had just learned a new language by being shouted at in it. 5 fighters, 5 different skill sets, all of them stronger than me in raw output by orders of magnitude. None of them had landed a single hit. I was not breathing hard. That bothered them more than the loss. Back at the workshop, everyone was filthy. Dust, sweat, and the residue of a dozen different spells caked into every piece of armor. I suggested the bath. It was practical advice. Hot water loosens muscles better than purification magic, and tomorrow's dungeon performance depends on today's recovery. Bram turned red, mumbled something about guild errands, and dragged Lahi out the door before anyone could object. I watched them go and said nothing. Some things do not require commentary. That left 3 women, 1 bathhouse, and 1 malfunctioning water heater that I had built to my own specifications, and apparently neglected to label. The screaming started about 4 minutes later. Elise had tried to operate the heater. The heater had opinions about being operated by someone who was not me. Hot water began firing in every direction, at pressure levels I had not realized the system could achieve. I heard the chaos from the living room. I walked to the door. I called out a warning. I opened it. The scene on the other side was exactly what a rational person would have predicted, and exactly what I had failed to predict, because some part of my brain had decided that towels were a universal constant. Towels were not a universal constant. I fixed the heater in about 8 seconds. I turned to leave. Serena pointed out that I was soaked. Mira pointed out that night air on wet clothes causes illness. Elise pointed out that I had personally lectured them on the importance of physical maintenance not 2 hours ago. Their logic was airtight. Their combined grip strength was insurmountable. I found myself in the bath before I had finished constructing a counter-argument. Serena settled in on my right, with the ease of someone who had been planning this since Tuesday. Mira pressed in on my left, with enthusiasm that registered on my detection skills as a minor seismic event. Elise sat across from me, face still flushed, eyes steady, watching me with an expression that contained no panic at all anymore. I lasted approximately 90 seconds before my vision vision went sideways, and I dropped like a stone. The last thing I heard before everything went dark was 3 voices saying my name in 3 different registers of alarm. Somewhere underneath the alarm, I am fairly certain at least one of them was laughing. The next morning, I led the party into the deep floors and immediately proved I should not have. Every time I closed my eyes, the bath played itself back in high fidelity. Serena's composure, Mira's energy, Elise's expression when the panic left her face and something else replaced it. I gave Bram a wrong direction call on the first encounter, left when I meant right. The correction came fast enough that nobody got hurt, but Bram gave me a look and I deserved it. 2 minutes later, I almost walked into a pit trap that my detection skill had flagged clearly. I just was not reading the flags. Elise noticed before anyone else. She always did. She moved to my side without announcement. Her voice dropped to a register only I could hear. "You are not functional," she said, not a question. I am aware. Her mouth did something that was not quite a smile. "Last night was informative, but right now, I need you to let me handle the floor." A pause. Then, quieter. "I will give it back when you have recovered." I looked at her. The woman who had been chasing me for weeks was not chasing me right now. She was offering to carry something because I could not. "The tactical calls are yours," I said. "Your mana sight is sharper than my detection at this range anyway." She did not thank me. She did not celebrate. She turned to the party and her voice went clear and precise, cutting through the dungeon corridor like a blade through fog. "Serena, 3 o'clock, mana signature approaching. Mira, shadow movement on the left flank. Bram and Lahi, hold center formation." The party responded without hesitation, not because she announced a transfer of command, because she gave the right call at the right moment. And in a fight, correct information delivered instantly is indistinguishable from authority. I watched her run 3 engagements. No wasted words, no second guessing. Every call placed with the same precision she brought to everything she touched. She had been watching how I commanded. She had memorized the patterns, and now she was executing them with a fluency that told me she had not just been studying me out of interest. She had been preparing for exactly this. Something shifted in the way I saw her. Not the way she moved or spoke, the way she fit. The sub-leader title had been a formality until today. It was not a formality anymore. I did not say any of this out loud. She did not ask me to. By the time we cleared the floor and headed for the surface, my head was quieter. The bath was still in there, but it had competition now. What I kept replaying instead was the moment she turned to the party and gave her first order, and 5 people followed her without a breath of hesitation. Dawn's Perch was becoming something I had not planned for, a party that could function without me at the center. That should have been a relief. It was not entirely a relief. They did not need me anymore. I knew it the way you know a building is finished. Not because someone tells you, but because the scaffolding looks wrong still standing there. Elise called the formations from the front line, her mana sight tracking every creature before it cleared the dark. Serena anchored the right flank without being told. Mira cut through the gaps. Bram and Lahi punched through the center without a single word between them. I stood in the back and watched. "Serena, hold the right wing. Mira, take the flanks. Bram and Lahi, break the center." Elise's voice carried through the cavern, sharp, precise, no wasted syllable, the same cadence I used to give commands. She had not copied it. She had understood it and rebuilt it in her own register, which was worse because it meant the thing lived outside of me now. The last creature fell. Nobody was injured. Nobody had been out of position for a single second. I walked to the mineral wall and activated my appraisal. Level 1. Same as always. The rare deposits showed as unidentifiable, too high grade for my skill tier to parse. That was fine. I cleared the surrounding rock with earth magic, and whatever refused to be appraised was, by definition, what we came for. Mithril fragments, deep vein alloy clusters, things that would sell for more than most parties earned in a month. I packed them into the spatial expansion bag on reflex. Elise exhaled behind me. "Your efficiency is still absurd. It is the same as yesterday." That is what I said. The run was the best we had ever pulled from the deep floors. Everyone was healthy. Everyone was sharp. The system I had built was running without me at the center of it. This was the moment I had been waiting for since the day I walked out of the guild hall with my card in my pocket and nothing else. That night, I made tea. It was a small thing. Hot water, dried herbs, cups I had carved from dungeon stone during an idle afternoon. The common room was warm. Bram sat cross-legged on the floor, telling Lahi about a spell combination he wanted to try. Mira was curled in the large chair she had claimed on her second day and never relinquished. Serena held her cup with both hands, watching the steam. Elise sat with her back against the wall, legs crossed, one finger tracing the rim of her cup. I looked at each of them. Bram's dark circles were gone. Lottie's shoulders were down, not the guarded hunch she had carried when we found her. Mira's tail was moving slowly. Serena had taken her circlet off, which she only did when she was not thinking about being watched. Elise's eyes were half closed. They were fine. They were going to be fine. I set my cup down. Everyone, good work today. I kept my voice even. I had practiced this in my head for longer than I wanted to admit. There is something I have been thinking about, and I want to be honest with you. Bram looked up. Lottie stopped mid-sip. Mira's tail went still. Today's run confirmed what I have been seeing for a while now. You are a complete party. Your coordination, your skills, your ability to adapt under pressure, all of it is at a level where you do not need a level 1 handyman running logistics from the back. I paused. The next part was the part I had rehearsed the most. I have enough saved to live quietly for a long time. This was always meant to be temporary. I think it is time for me to step back and return to the retirement I originally planned. The room did not get louder. It got empty. Serena's cup slipped from her fingers. The ceramic hit the stone floor with a bright, clean crack that sounded like it came from much farther away than it did. Tea pooled around her boots. She did not look down. Her eyes had not moved from my face since the word retirement left my mouth. Her expression was still composed, perfectly composed. I had watched Serena maintain composure through dungeon ambushes, through Mira's worst provocations, through the bath incident that should have destroyed anyone's dignity. She was very good at it. She was not good enough for this. The fracture was small, a tightening at the corner of her mouth, a stillness in her hands that was not calm, but the opposite of calm, held in place by force. The stillness of someone processing something that did not have a shape yet and refusing to let it land until they were somewhere private. Mira did not have that problem. The first sound she made was not a word. It was a noise, low, from somewhere in her chest, the sound a large animal makes when it does not understand what is happening but knows it is wrong. Then she was on her feet and her arms were around my waist, and she was crying in the way that Mira did everything, without reservation, without calculation, without any space between what she felt and what the room saw. No, her face was pressed into my chest. Her voice came out muffled and thick. "You are not leaving. I will not allow it." I opened my mouth. I had a response for this. I had several responses for this. "Mira, listen to me." She shook her head against my ribs, hard, the way a child does when the negotiation is already over and the answer is the one they arrived with. Then Bram. I was prepared for Bram to argue. Bram argued with everything: the weather, the dungeon layout, the optimal distance between bedrolls. He delivered opinions at volume and at length and did not stop until someone either agreed or physically relocated. Bram said nothing. He stood up from the floor. His face had lost its color. His mouth opened, then closed, and then he was just standing there with an expression I had never seen on him. Not in the dungeon, not in training, not when Heaven's crown had ground him down to nothing. He looked like someone had taken something out of him. Not anger, not grief, something structural. Bram's silence made the room wrong in a way I had not prepared for. I could plan around words. I could plan around tears. But silence from the one person in this party who had never been silent, that was not on the map. Lottie was the quietest. She was always the quietest. She had stepped back from the group, not toward the door, but toward the wall, looking for something solid that was not a person. Her knuckles were white around her cup. She was not crying. I could see what that was costing her. The careful, practiced effort of someone who had learned a long time ago not to break down in front of the people she needed. She had been safe for weeks. That should not be enough to build a foundation on, but I watched her face and understood that it was everything she had. And Elise. Elise said nothing. She had not moved from her position against the wall. Her posture had not changed, but her eyes were open now, fully open, and they were on me, and in them was something I had never seen from her before. Not the analytical gaze, not the tactician reading the room, just looking at me, like she was seeing the shape of the room without me in it and finding it unacceptable. A single line of tears ran down her face. She did not wipe it. She did not acknowledge it. It was there, and she was looking at me, and neither of those things had any strategy behind them. I had gamed out arguments from Elise a dozen times. She was the most dangerous debater in the room, clinical, precise, capable of dismantling a position with 2 sentences. Every version ended with me winning on logic and retreating before the emotional ground shifted. She was not arguing. She was not doing anything. That was the part I had not gamed out, the part where 5 people just sat in it. I tried again. "The guild has systems in place for party transitions," I said. My voice was steady. I was moderately proud of that. "You have Elise's tactical command. You have Bram's firepower and Lottie's positioning. Serena and Mira form one of the strongest offensive pairs in the top 50. The formation works. I was monitoring for weeks to make sure, and it works. Nobody responded. I will leave the mining protocols documented. The spatial bag stays with the party. The workshop is paid through the end of the season, and I will extend it if you need the space. Mira's arms tightened around my waist. The optimization plans for each of your skill paths are written down. Elise has copies. The training schedules run themselves at this point. I built them to be self-correcting. Bram was still standing in the same place. His hands were at his sides. He had not moved. You will be fine. The numbers support it. The runs support it. Every metric I track says this party is ready to operate independently, and I would not be telling you this if I did not believe it. Every word was true. I had checked the data 3 times. The party would rank up, clear deeper floors, sustain itself. The logistics were clean and the future was solid, and I was not wrong about any of it. Serena looked at me. Her composure was holding, but only barely. Everything she was not saying was louder than anything Mira was saying into my shirt. Lottie's back was against the wall. She was breathing carefully. In, hold, out. The rhythm of someone who had taught themselves not to fall apart. Elise had not moved. The tear had dried. She was still watching me, not waiting for me to finish. I think she already knew I was finished, waiting for the part that came after. I stood in my own workshop, surrounded by the people I had trained and equipped and healed and fed and housed, and I understood something that the numbers had not predicted, and the projections had not captured, and the self-correcting schedules could not account for. I was making a good argument. Every piece of it was correct. It did not matter. Not because they were wrong, not because the logic failed, but because the thing in this room was not about the party's operational capacity. It was about the fact that Bram had stopped talking, that Lottie was bracing herself against a wall, that Mira was holding on to me like I was the only solid thing left, that Serena's composure had a shelf life measured in seconds, that Elise was looking at me without a strategy. I had spent my whole career solving problems by being useful, by building systems, by making the invisible machinery that held things together. I did not know how to stand in a room full of people who needed me and still walk out. 5 minutes. That was how long the retirement lasted. Not even 5 good minutes. Closer to 3. Fine. My voice came out quieter than I expected. Mira's grip on my waist shifted, but did not loosen. The timing is not right. I was premature. We can revisit it later. Some unspecified date. A future I was filing under tactical postponement, because the alternative was admitting that I had just lost a fight I was winning. The room exhaled. Mira's crying shifted register. Same volume, different species. Bram sat down, slowly, like someone whose legs had been waiting for permission. Serena picked up the pieces of her cup very carefully, with hands that were not quite steady. Lottie's breathing evened out. She did not uncross her arms for a long time. Elise looked at me. The corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile, not really, but the acknowledgement of something she had already known. She nodded once. Then she closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the wall. Nobody asked for a specific date. Nobody pressed for terms. Nobody celebrated or thanked me or made it into a moment. They just let it go, as though the softer version of the answer was enough, as though they knew. They knew. I packed the tea things. Bram helped, which meant he was functional again, which meant I had not broken anything permanently. Mira eventually released my waist and went to her chair and curled up there with her tail wrapped tight around her knees. Serena wiped the tea from the floor and said nothing about the cup. Lottie drifted back to her seat and sat in it very quietly, like someone settling into a place they had been told they could keep. We headed for the surface. Nobody talked about it. The corridor was quiet in a way that was different from the silence before. Not heavy, not holding something back, just quiet. Elise walked beside me, close enough that her shoulder almost brushed mine. Neither of us said anything. The space between us was the smallest it had ever been, and neither of us was going to be the one to name it. Behind us, Bram was talking to Lottie again. Something about tomorrow's supply run. His voice was back. A little too loud for the corridor, a little too fast for the subject, but it was his voice, and hearing it after those minutes of nothing was worth more than I was prepared to calculate. Mira walked on my other side. Her eyes were still red. She bumped her shoulder into mine, hard enough to make me stagger, and grinned when I looked over. The grin was watery. She did not care. Serena's composure had reassembled so cleanly that if you had not been in the room, you would never know it had been gone. But I had been in the room. The night air hit us at the tunnel mouth. Cool, clean, carrying the faint salt of the harbor. Stars over Herafutin, same as always. I had walked into that room with responses for every objection. What I had not accounted for was the possibility that nobody would object, that 5 people would simply be hurt, and that being the cause of it would be the one thing my 35 skills could not fix. Tomorrow, the schedule would resume. Dawn's Perch would carry on as though tonight had not happened. But something had happened. In the space between my announcement and my retreat, something had been said without words and settled without agreement. I had chosen them, not the slow life, not the retirement, them. I was not ready to say that out loud, but standing at the mouth of the dungeon with the night sky above, I knew one thing clearly. The retirement was not postponed, it was gone. And I did not know whether that was a defeat or the first honest decision I had made in years. The night after I told 5 people I was staying, I did what I always did. I went to the soundproofed shelter beneath the workshop, spent 2 hours building and dissolving stone walls until every drop of mana I had was gone, and dragged myself upstairs to bed. I remember my head touching the pillow. I remember thinking I should check the mining yields from earlier. I do not remember anything after that. Apparently, Elise came in. She had timed it, because of course she had. Waited until the light under my door went dark, counted to 60, then slipped inside in a thin nightgown she had never worn before. She sat on the edge of my bed, leaned close, and whispered something about not wanting to be alone tonight. I was told later that I patted her head once, murmured something reassuring about not going anywhere, and fell unconscious mid-syllable. 3 seconds, maybe less. She sat there for a while after that. I know because Serena told me. Serena knew because she had been waiting in the hallway for her own turn. Serena came the next night. Different approach. She opened the door slowly, checked the room, and heard me snoring before she had taken 2 steps inside. Full unconsciousness. The deep kind, where the body is recovering from total mana depletion and environmental noise stops existing. She stood in the doorway for what I am told was an uncomfortable amount of time, then closed the door quietly and went back to her room. I did not know any of this was happening. Mira tried the 3rd night. She did not bother with strategy. She walked in, sat on the floor next to my bed, and poked my shoulder. Nothing. She poked harder. She said my name. She leaned her whole weight against the cot frame, and it creaked loud enough to wake anyone in normal sleep. I did not move. She stayed for a while anyway. I was told she fell asleep on the floor next to me, which is the most Mira thing I have ever heard described secondhand. I found out about all 3 attempts at the same time, weeks later, because Bram could not keep a secret to save his life, and overheard the kitchen conversation. The conversation itself happened the morning after Mira's attempt. 3 women at the kitchen table, 3 cups of tea, 3 expressions of deep personal offense. Elise had analyzed my sleep pattern and concluded my willpower was superhuman. Serena had decided her approach needed fundamental restructuring. Mira had taken the failure as a personal challenge to her entire physical presence. None of them had considered that I was simply unconscious, not resisting, not disciplined, not making a choice, just gone, the same way I was gone every night. Because draining 7,000 units of mana to 0 produces a crash that is closer to a coma than to sleep. They did not know about the training. They did not know about the mana pool. They thought my restraint was iron. My restraint was not iron. My restraint was absent. I was not in the building, mentally speaking. I was somewhere beneath consciousness, and the 3 most determined women in Herafutin had each independently lost to a man who was not even aware he was being pursued. I would have found this funnier if I had known about it at the time. By the time Bram told me, the ranking had already come out, and I had other things to worry about. The guild posted quarterly rankings on the 1st of the month. I had checked the output numbers the week before and had a rough idea of where we would land. But rough ideas and public boards are different things. The hall was packed. Every party in Herafutin showed up for ranking day because the board determined quest priority, guild resource allocation, and, most importantly, who bought drinks at the tavern that night. The atmosphere was the particular kind of loud that happens when 200 people are all pretending they do not care about a number while staring at the place where the number will appear. The board went up at 9. I was standing near the back with Elise when the noise changed. Not louder, different. The buzzing chatter collapsed into a specific kind of silence, followed by a wave of voices that sounded less like celebration and more like people checking whether they had read something correctly. Dawn's Perch, rank 1. Not close. Not by a narrow margin where the scoring methodology could be questioned. The output differential between us and the 2nd place party was wider than the gap between 2nd and 20th. Bram grabbed my shoulder. He was vibrating. Did you see it? I saw it. Rank 1. He said it like the word itself was new. We are rank 1. The party that has existed for 8 months. Rank 1. "I can read a board, Bram." Mira's tail was wagging so fast it was hitting the adventurer behind her. She did not notice. He did, but he looked at the board, looked at the tail, and decided this was not the morning to raise the issue. Lottie stood next to Serena, studying the numbers with the expression of someone who had spent the last several months waiting for proof that she had chosen correctly. The proof was on the wall, in letters large enough to read from the entrance. Elise's reaction was the smallest, and, as usual, the one I watched longest. She looked at the board, she looked at me. One corner of her mouth lifted, precisely controlled, exactly as much as she intended. She nodded. That was it. That was the entire celebration from the woman who had built the tactical framework that made the output possible. Near the bottom of the board, I noticed the name I was expecting, Heaven's Crown, below the 100th position, still falling. A few of the senior adventurers near the board were exchanging glances. I recognized 3 of them from the years before Dawn's Perch, back when I had helped train their skills before they moved on to their own parties. They had been in the guild hall the day I was expelled. They had watched the speech. They had said nothing at the time. They were not saying anything now either, but the look that passed between them when they read the board had a specific quality. Not surprise, confirmation. The quiet satisfaction of people who had known a thing for years and had just watched the rest of the world catch up. One of them caught my eye across the hall. He raised his cup. No words, no speech, just the cup, tilted slightly in my direction, and a nod that said everything the ranking board already proved. I nodded back. That was enough. The party celebrated at the tavern. I told them I had inventory to sort and came back to the workshop alone. I sat at the bench in the lower level and did something I had been avoiding. I pulled out my notes and ran the numbers. Mana capacity, 7,400, growing by roughly 50 per week, and the rate was accelerating. Total active skills, 35, all level 1, all combinable. Simultaneous combination ceiling. I could run 12 at once without efficiency loss, 14 with acceptable degradation. The output range when channeling support into a single target, Bram, for example, or Elise's monocyte, exceeded what most dedicated level 10 mages could produce alone. I stared at the page. The individual numbers were familiar. I had tracked each one for years, but I had never put them together, never added the columns, never calculated the aggregate, and looked at what the total actually described. 7,400 was not a support number. It was not a slow life number. It was not the monopool of a man who wanted to sort inventory and take easy quests and retire in a year. 7,400 was the reason a 6-person party had cleared a monster wave that should have required 50 adventurers, and done it in an hour, and none of the 6 had taken a serious injury. It was the reason the dungeon depths that used to require Heaven's Crown at full strength now took us half a day. It was the reason the ranking board looked the way it did. It was the reason I could not hide anymore. I put the notes down. My hands were steady. The rest of me was not. The ranking had made us visible. The number on that page explained why. And the part that unsettled me, the part I sat with for a long time in the quiet of the workshop, was not the size of it. It was that I had built it on purpose. Every night, every depletion cycle, every stone wall conjured and dissolved in the dark. I had been preparing for something. I had told myself it was maintenance, habit, the discipline of a man who had nothing else to do with his evenings. But 7,400 does not happen by accident. It happens because somewhere underneath the slow life plans and the retirement speeches and the careful distance, a part of me had always known that the exit was temporary, that I would need this, that whatever came next would require everything I had built in silence. I heard voices from the guild entrance above, familiar tones, carrying the specific energy of people who had seen a ranking board and were not happy about it. I closed my notes, put them in the drawer, stood up. Whatever was coming, the number said I was ready for it. That was the part that frightened me. The tavern had given us the front table, not because we asked, because the owner had read the ranking board that morning and decided that the #1 party in Herafutin should sit where everyone entering could see them. I would have preferred the back corner. The front table had that quality of being looked at by people who were pretending not to look, which was the opposite of everything I wanted from a quiet evening. But Bram was already halfway through his second plate. Mira was arm wrestling a man twice her weight and winning without effort, and Lottie had the particular expression of someone enjoying the first celebration she had ever attended where no one was going to ruin it for her. Elise sat across from me. She had not touched her drink. Her eyes moved through the room in the systematic way that meant she was reading the crowd, cataloging threat vectors out of habit. Serena sat beside her, composed, turning her cup slowly on the table. A small, unremarkable evening. That was all I wanted it to be. The front door opened hard enough to knock the frame against the wall. The sound cut through the tavern noise, the way a wrong note cuts through a chord. I did not need to turn around. Roland came through the crowd like a man who expected it to part for him. It did, but not the way it used to. They moved because he was loud, and his face was the color of something about to rupture. The 4 members still attached to Heaven's crown trailed behind him in a loose formation that suggested they had not agreed on what was about to happen. He stopped 3 paces from our table. He called me by name. He said the ranking was a fraud. He said I had poached his members through underhanded recruitment, that Bram and Lahi had been scouted and developed by his party, that their departure was theft, and that the guild would hear about it. He said these things at a volume designed to reach every table in the room. The tavern went quiet in stages. First the tables nearest to us, then the middle of the room, then the bar. By the time he finished, the only sound was the creak of Mira's chair as she turned to face him. I looked at Roland. He looked the way he always had, polished armor, cloak with the Heaven's crown insignia. The expression of a man who believed his own argument, because admitting it was wrong would cost more than he could afford. I did not answer him. Bram did. Bram stood, not fast, not angry. He pushed his plate aside, set his hands on the table, and rose to his full height with the specific calm of someone who had rehearsed what he was about to say and was going to deliver it exactly as prepared. Scouted. He repeated the word like he was reading it off a specimen label. You put me in the front line of every formation, alone. No backup, no rotation, no healing support. On my 3rd mission, you assigned me point position against a rock golem without telling me the corridor was too narrow for retreat. On my 5th, you canceled the rest period between floors because the clear rate was behind schedule. On my 7th, the party's mage hit me with a fire blast that was aimed at the monster behind me, and when I reported it, you told me to stop complaining about friendly fire. The room was listening, not because Bram was loud. He was not loud at all. He was speaking at conversational volume, and every word landed the way a blade lands when the edge is clean. You did not scout me. You used me until I broke, and when I ran, you called it betrayal. He sat down, picked up his fork, went back to his plate. Lahi stood next. She was shaking, not from fear, from the particular effort of someone who has decided to say something in a room full of strangers and is going to say it even if her voice does not cooperate. I joined because I had no other options. Her voice was quiet. The tavern strained to hear her. On my 2nd dungeon run, the party left me behind when the retreat order came. I was alone with the monsters for 40 minutes before I found my own way out. No one came back for me. She paused. Her hands were fists at her sides. Night watches were always mine, every night. No rotation. And the comments. She stopped for a moment, started again. The things they said to me, about my body, about what I owed them for taking me in. The silence in the room had changed. It was not the silence of people listening to a dispute. It was the silence of people hearing a record they could not unhear. I did not leave because someone recruited me. Lahi's voice steadied on the last sentence. I left because I was going to die there, and I knew it, and no one in that party cared. She sat down. Bram put his hand on her shoulder. She did not move it. Roland's face had gone from red to white. He opened his mouth. He said something about lies, about ingratitude, about people who could not handle the demands of a serious party. Nobody in the room was looking at him the way he wanted them to. He reached for his sword. It was not a draw. It was the motion before a draw. The hand closing on the grip, the weight shifting to the back foot. The kind of gesture a man makes when he has run out of words and still needs the room to take him seriously. 3 things happened at the same time. The air around Elise dropped in temperature so sharply that the moisture on the nearest tankards froze solid. She had not stood. She had not moved her hands. She was sitting exactly as she had been, watching Roland with an expression that contained nothing a reasonable person would want directed at them. You called him worthless. Her voice was even, almost conversational. The man who kept your barriers running, who mapped your routes, who supplied your mana, who built your shelters. You called him worthless, and now you have drawn a sword in front of me. Serena was already on her feet. Her shield was off her back and set, her sword hand resting on the pommel, body angled to place herself between Roland and the table. She had not rushed. She had moved with the economy of someone who had calculated the necessary position before the hand touched the grip. Mira did not stand. She turned in her chair, and from somewhere deep in her chest came a sound that was not a growl and not a word. It was the low vibration of something large and predatory that had decided the thing in front of it was prey. Her clawed gauntlets caught the lantern light. The adventurer at the next table moved his chair back without thinking about it. Roland's remaining party members took 3 steps backward, in unison, as if they had practiced it. Roland did not complete the draw. His hand stayed on the grip, but did not pull. He was looking at the 3 of them, and for the first time since I had had known him, I watched his face do the math it should have done months ago. These were not decorative companions. These were not support staff. These were the combat corps of the #1 party in the city, and each of them was looking at him with the specific kind of attention that comes right before violence stops being theoretical. I had not moved. I was sitting where I had been when he walked in, hands on the table, watching. There was nothing for me to do. The people around me had answered the question before I needed to consider it. The guildmaster stepped forward from near the bar. He had been there since before Roland arrived. I had seen him come in during the second round of drinks and take a position near the back where he could observe without being addressed. He had been waiting. He looked at Roland's hand on the sword. He looked at the frozen tankards. He looked at the room. Then he spoke, and his voice carried the particular weight of a man who does not need volume because the authority is structural. He told Roland that Bram and Lottie's departure from Heaven's Crown had been processed through proper channels, with documented cause. He listed what the guild had on file: repeated instances of friendly fire against party members, abandonment of teammates during dungeon retreats, denial of standard rest rotations, and formal complaints of harassment that had been filed and logged months before either of them left. He said the word harassment without emphasis, which made it land harder. He told Roland that Heaven's Crown was ranked below the 100th position. He told him that Dawn's Perch was ranked first, by a margin that made the comparison uncomfortable. He said these were facts, not accusations, and that facts did not require Roland's agreement to be true. I waited for the guildmaster to finish. Then I stood. Two things. I kept my voice at the level I use for mission briefings, flat, informational. Before Bram quit your party, he was sent into a narrow passage against a rock-type monster with no retreat path. The corridor ceiling was unstable. I collapsed the far end with earth magic from the level above to seal the monster's advance line, and opened a side passage for him to withdraw through. He did not know it was me. I did not file a report. The room was still. Before Lottie left, your party triggered a retreat and left her alone on the lower floor. I tracked her position with detection magic, destabilized the terrain between her and the nearest monster cluster to buy time, and left a safe route marked with resonance stones she could follow by feel in the dark. She found her way out. She thought the passage had always been there. I sat down. Bram was staring at me. Lottie had both hands over her mouth. Neither of them had known. Roland stared at me. He said something. It did not matter what. He said I was lying, or exaggerating, or trying to make myself look good. The words came out of him the way water comes out of a cracked vessel, without direction and losing volume. The guildmaster did not wait for him to finish. He expelled Heaven's Crown from the guild, effective immediately. No review process, no appeal. Drawing a weapon in the guild tavern during a formal dispute was grounds for immediate removal, and the documented record made reinstatement a question no review board would entertain. Roland stood there. His hand was still on the sword he had never drawn. The 4 members behind him were already moving toward the door. He looked at me. I looked back. There was nothing to say. There had never been anything to say. The man who had expelled me from his party in front of the entire guild was now being expelled from the guild in front of the entire city. The symmetry was not poetic. It was just what happened when you removed the person holding everything together and then blamed them for the collapse. He left. The door closed behind him. The room exhaled. Bram's voice, quiet for the first time since I had known him. You saved me before I even knew who you were. It was a structural problem. I picked up my drink. The corridor was going to collapse anyway. I just adjusted the timing. Lottie did not say anything. She put her forehead on the table and stayed there for a while. Her shoulders moved once. Bram kept his hand where it was. Elise watched me across the table. The ice on the tankards was melting. The temperature was returning to normal. She did not say a word, but her eyes held the look of someone who had just added another entry to a file she had been building since the day we met. Serena set her shield down. Mira's growl had stopped the moment Roland began to leave. The tavern noise returned in pieces, conversations resuming at tables that had been frozen for the last several minutes. I drank. The evening was quiet after that. The front table felt different now. Not like being displayed, like being exactly where we were supposed to be. On the walk home, nobody said much. Bram and Lottie walked ahead, close together, carrying something between them that was lighter than it had been an hour ago. The 3 women walked behind me. I could feel them there without looking, the way you feel a structure you built when the foundation holds under weight. The guild hall was dark when we passed it. The ranking board was still visible through the window, lit by a single lantern left burning overnight. Dawn's Perch, rank 1. I looked at it for 1 second, then I kept walking. The record was enough. It had always been enough. The problem was that nobody had read it until tonight. The workshop smelled like metal shavings, and the tea nobody was drinking. We had walked home without a word. The guild hall had gone dark behind us, the ranking board still visible through the window by the light of a single overnight lantern, and nobody had mentioned it. Nobody had mentioned anything. That was fine. There was nothing to mention that the room did not already know. Bram and Lahi took the corner they always took, the same spot since the week they joined, the same blankets, the same quiet proximity to each other that said nothing romantic, and everything about two people who had survived the same thing. Bram had his arms folded across his chest and was staring at the ceiling. I knew what he was doing. He was going back through his Heaven's Crown missions one by one, identifying the moments where something had gone unexpectedly right, and discovering for the first time that those moments had a name: mine. Lahi sat with her knees pulled up and her chin resting on them. She was not shaking anymore. She had stopped somewhere on the walk home, and the stillness that replaced it was not fragile. It was the stillness of someone who had set something down and was in the process of realizing how heavy it had been. Elise made tea. She poured 5 cups, distributed them without asking, and did not touch her own. She sat near the window with her hands around the cup, her long ears angled toward me in the way they did when she was listening to something she had not figured out yet. Serena stood at the other window, arms crossed, watching the street below with the composed focus of someone who would not sleep for a while and was content with that. Mira sat next to me, close enough that her arm touched mine. She was not pretending it was accidental, and I was not pretending I had not noticed. I went to the work table, the mana depletion ritual, the same one I had done every night since before any of them knew me. Stone constructs built and dissolved over and over until the pool drained to nothing and the exhaustion took the decision about sleep out of my hands. I started building a miniature wall, a pillar, a staircase that went nowhere. Dissolve, build, dissolve. Bram watched from his corner. You have done that every single night since I got here. Longer than that? How much longer? Years. He went quiet. I kept building. Somewhere behind me, Mira's breathing slowed. Serena's reflection in the window had not moved. Elise's tea was still untouched. The last of the mana left me in a rush that felt like stepping into cold water, and the workshop blurred. I caught the edge of the table with both hands. The stone pillar I had been building crumbled into dust. Done, I said, to nobody in particular. My forehead hit the table. The lamplight went soft at the edges. The last thing I heard before sleep took me was Bram saying something to Lahi, quiet, almost to himself. Something about becoming strong enough to stand next to that and meaning it. The guildmaster sent for me the next morning. The message arrived at the workshop carried by a junior clerk who looked at our front door, looked at the address on his paper, and looked at the door again with the expression of someone who had expected the #1 party in the city to live somewhere that did not smell like stone dust and solvent. I took the note, thanked him, and told him the door stuck on humid days, so he should push harder on the way out. Elise insisted on coming. Bram and Lahi came because Bram did not have an off switch for situations involving his master and official guild business. Serena and Mira stayed behind. Serena because someone should hold the workshop. Mira because Serena had given her a look that communicated an entire tactical briefing in one glance. The guild hall looked the same as always. Crowded, loud, smelling faintly of someone's boots drying too close to a fire. The last time I had stood in the center of this room, Roland had been explaining to everyone present why keeping me around would be irresponsible. He had practiced the speech. He had chosen the most visible seat. He had performed concern so convincingly that the 3 women behind him had dabbed their eyes with handkerchiefs while whispering about his replacement. That had been months ago. It felt like a different building. The guildmaster was waiting near the front, standing rather than sitting, which meant this was not a private conversation. The hall was full, not arranged, not summoned, just the ordinary morning crowd of adventurers collecting quests, filing reports, nursing yesterday's drinks. The timing was deliberate. He wanted the room to be normal. He wanted the words to land in an ordinary moment. He greeted me by name. He said what he had to say without ceremony, without preamble, and without the particular theatrical gravity that Roland had once used in this same hall for a very different speech. He said the guild kept individual contribution records. He said these records tracked every action logged against a registered adventurer's name, not party reports, not team submissions, but solo entries, infrastructure repair, emergency supply provision, deep layer mapping, critical heal interventions, volunteer city maintenance, rare material processing sold below market to make it accessible. He said my name was at the top of every category, not recently, not since Dawn's Perch, for years, quietly. consistently, in volumes that exceeded the combined output of most parties operating in the city. He said I had mined deep layer metals solo and delivered them to the guild at cost, that I had repaired the city's defensive walls and waterways with earth magic on my days off without filing for compensation, that I had processed common herbs into potions and sold them at prices low enough for beginning adventurers and city residents who could not afford the premium stock, that people were alive because of those potions who would not have been otherwise. He said I had kept all of it on non-public status. He said the guild had honored that request for as long as it made sense to. He said it no longer made sense. The hall was quiet, not the held breath silence of a confrontation, the drifting silence of people who had stopped what they were doing because the thing they were overhearing was more important than whatever they had been about to do. I stood there. The records were accurate. Every item he listed, I had done. I had not experienced any of it as contribution. The walls needed fixing, so I fixed them. The potions were simple to make, and the markup on high-quality stock was criminal, so I undercut it. The deep layer metals were there, and I was already in the dungeon, so I brought them back. These were just things that needed doing. Hearing them read in sequence, in a full guild hall, by the man who ran the institution was the first time I understood what the aggregate looked like from the outside. Bram's voice broke the silence. It came out louder than he intended, the way his voice always did when something exceeded his capacity to process it quietly. He asked if the #1 individual contributor ranking meant what he thought it meant, if it included the dragon-killing parties and the other top rankers. The guildmaster confirmed it as though confirming the weather. Behind me, Elise had gone very still. I did not turn around, but I could feel her attention the way you feel a change in air pressure, recalculating. Adding this to the file she had been building since the morning I agreed to guide 3 women into a dungeon for no reason I could properly explain. The hall cleared slowly. People went back to their quests, their drinks, their conversations, but the quality of the room had changed. The glances I caught on the way out were not the blank looks I had spent years cultivating. They were the looks of people who were seeing someone for the first time and trying to reconcile what they saw with what they had just heard. I stopped in the entrance, the same doorway I had walked out of months ago, feeling nothing in the best possible way. The sunlight hit the stone steps the same way it had that morning. The street below was the same street. The smell of the canal and the bakery, 2 doors down, and the faint mineral tang of the dungeon entrance across the square was the same. Everything was the same, except that the man standing in this doorway was not invisible anymore, and he had built that invisibility on purpose, maintained it carefully, and could not get it back. The slow life, the solo runs, the quiet days of mining and building and dissolving stone castles alone in the dark, with nobody watching and nobody counting. That chapter was finished. I had known it was finishing for weeks. I had known it since the ranking went up, since Bram called me master in front of people who were listening, since 3 women decided independently that I was worth fighting for in a room full of witnesses. But hearing the guildmaster read the record out loud in the hall where I had been expelled made it real in a way that knowing had not. I was still standing there when Lahi appeared beside me. She had a way of arriving without announcement, not deliberately quiet, just naturally economical with space, the way someone learns to be when they have spent a long time trying not to be noticed. She stood next to me and looked out at the city. The morning crowd moved through the square, guild runners and market vendors, and a woman carrying a basket of bread that smelled better than anything a dungeon had ever produced. The timing was right, she said. I looked at her. For this, she did not gesture at the hall behind us. She did not need to. It was the right time for people to know. She said it the way she said everything, quietly, without extra words, without the need to convince anyone that what she was saying was true, because the truth of it was self-evident, and she trusted me to see it. I did not have a response. She was correct, and I could not argue with correctness. The timing had been right. The invisibility had served its purpose, and its purpose was done. And the man who had built it was standing in a doorway, looking at a city that had just learned his name. We walked out together, down the stone steps, into the square, into the morning sunlight. That was the same sunlight I had walked into on the day I was expelled, when the slow life was a promise, and the future was an empty road with no one else on it. The road was not empty anymore. It had 5 people on it, and a ranking, and a record, and a city that was going to look at me differently starting today. The slow life had never started. It was not going to start. Something was coming that I could not see yet, and I was going to have to meet it as the person everyone now knew I was, instead of the person I had spent years pretending to be. Behind me, the guild hall stood the way it always had, crowded, loud, loud, smelling faintly of someone's boots, drawing too close to a fire. I had walked out of that hall once before. That time, I had felt nothing. This time, I felt the weight of everything I had built settling onto my shoulders, the way armor settles when you stop adjusting it and accept that it fits. Lahi walked beside me. Bram and Elise were ahead, Bram gesturing at something with the energy of a man whose entire worldview had just been confirmed and improved simultaneously. Elise was listening to him with the patience she reserved for information she intended to use later. The city was the same city. The canal glittered. A merchant waved at someone. A pair of beginning adventurers argued about which quest to take while blocking the guild steps. The chapter was over. The next one had not started yet. I did not know what it would contain, but I knew the people who would be in it. And for a man who had spent most of his career being invisible, that was more than enough to walk toward. A few days after the guild ceremony, we took our first real rest day. I had personal errands. I told the party the night before, left early, and did not explain further because there was nothing to explain. The three of them went shopping at the market. I learned this later. At the time, I was walking toward the fountain square to meet my sister, and the only thing on my mind was that Clara had written twice in 1 week, which meant she was either worried or angry, and both required my full attention. I did not know that what happened next would nearly destroy a party that had survived a dungeon, a guild confrontation, and a public ranking ceremony without a scratch. Clara was waiting by the fountain. She spotted me before I spotted her, which was embarrassing given my 35 detection skills and her 0. "You look older," she said, wrapping both arms around my right arm and pulling herself against it the way she had done since she was 6. She had not outgrown it. I suspected she never would. "You look taller, 2 inches this semester." She beamed up at me with an expression so purely happy that I could not help the smile that cracked across my face. Clara had inherited everything our mother had been before the sickness took her. The warmth, the stubborn optimism, the absolute refusal to let me be miserable in peace. We walked. She asked about the party. I told her the version that left out the part where 3 women had been taking turns trying to share my bed. She asked about the guild ranking. I told her it had been fine. She asked if I was eating properly, and I said yes. And she called me a liar, which was fair. At the corner where the boulevard split toward the residential quarter, she stopped and gave me the look she used when she was about to say something she had been rehearsing. "You know you are allowed to be happy, right?" I did not answer that. She stretched up on her toes, kissed my cheek the way she always did when she was worried, and squeezed my arm. "There are good people around you now. I can tell from your letters. Stop pretending you do not deserve them." I walked her to the carriage station. She hugged me again, waved until the carriage turned the corner, and was gone. The whole visit had lasted maybe 40 minutes. It was the best 40 minutes I had experienced in weeks. Behind me, 60 paces back, 3 women were hiding behind a fruit stall with expressions that could have curdled milk at a distance. I pieced it together later, mostly from Mira, who was constitutionally incapable of keeping a secret longer than one conversation. They had been browsing a fabric stall when Mira's sharp eyes caught me on the boulevard. They had brightened, started toward me, and then frozen solid as Clara wrapped herself around my arm and pressed her cheek against my shoulder. Serena's crepe hit the cobblestones. Mira's tail went stiff as a bottle brush. Elise's immediate vicinity reportedly dropped several degrees in temperature, which I assumed was metaphorical, but with her was never entirely certain. They watched Clara stretch up and kiss my cheek. They watched me smile at her in a way that, I was told, none of them had ever seen me direct at anyone. They watched us walk arm in arm down the boulevard, laughing, talking, like the world contained nothing but the 2 of us. They did not know I had a sister. I had never mentioned Clara by name. I had never mentioned family at all. My personal history was not classified. It was just boring, and I did not volunteer boring information to 3 women who had spent months trying to crack the surface of a man who flinched from every romantic advance. The sight of him walking happily beside a beautiful young stranger was not ambiguous. It was a detonation. Elise spoke first, in the specific calm that preceded the dismantling of something. "We follow him." After Clara left, I walked to the orphanage on the east side. I had been helping there for months. The building was old, the roof leaked in 3 places, and the drainage system had been designed by someone who had apparently never seen rain. Every few weeks I stopped by, patched what needed patching, and reinforced whatever the children had managed to destroy since my last visit. It was honest work, the kind that did not require me to think about party dynamics, or 3 women who seemed to believe my bed was contested territory. The sister who ran the place met me at the gate with a patient smile. "The children have been asking when you would come back." A toddler attached himself to my leg before I cleared the courtyard. Maybe 2 years old, with a grip that suggested a future in grappling. I ruffled his hair. The sister lifted him into her arms and stood beside me as I assessed the roof. For a few seconds, the three of us stood there in the late morning sun. A man, a woman holding a child, surveying a building they both cared about. From 60 paces away, through a gap in the courtyard wall, this apparently looked like something else entirely. All three of them sank to their knees at the same time. Serena covered her face with both hands and went silent. Mira bit down on her own wrist to keep from wailing. She later described this moment as worse than the time a rock golem hit her in the stomach. Elise simply stared, the light leaving her eyes the way it did when her analytical model broke. Except the model breaking was not tactical, it was personal. Their conclusion: the young woman from the boulevard was his lover. The nun and the toddler were his wife and child. Every rejected advance for months made sense now. He was being faithful to someone who was not them. Clara was my sister. The sister was a nun. The toddler was an orphan. I was there to fix a roof. But jealousy does not process facts. It processes evidence, and the evidence was damning. I spotted the guild receptionist near the gate, leaning against the railing with one hand pressed to her temple. Pale face, shallow breathing. I recognized the signs immediately. Mana exhaustion, the real kind. She had drained herself past the safe threshold using detection tools for the emergency wall survey. She straightened when she saw me, embarrassed. I was just going to walk it off. Walking off mana exhaustion is how people collapse in the street. I held out my hand. 5 minutes. Mana supply required sustained physical contact. That was how the skill worked. I took her hand, interlaced fingers to maximize the contact surface, and began transferring. 7,000 points of mana reserve flowing through a level 1 channel at a controlled, steady rate. The effect on the recipient was immediate and, to outside observers, wildly misleading. Her cheeks flushed. Her breathing deepened. She looked up at me with an expression I can only call overwhelmed, because that is what mana flooding into a depleted system feels like. Warmth pouring into a space that had gone cold. "That is incredible," she breathed. "I can feel it moving through me." "Hold still. We can walk while I transfer." We walked together toward the damaged section of wall, hand in hand. Her face flushed, my focus entirely on maintaining the flow rate. It was a medical procedure. It looked, from outside, like a confession scene in a romantic play. The count, as Serena later described it, had reached 4. The lover, the wife, and child. And now the most popular receptionist in the guild, holding his hand in broad daylight with a face that looked like she was experiencing divine revelation. Serena had stopped speaking. She was pulling at her own hair with both hands, every scheme and stratagem suddenly meaningless against the apparent reality that I had been playing all of them from the start. Mira put her forehead on the ground. Her tail was flat. Her ears were pinned. Elise crossed a threshold I had not known she possessed. She stopped being angry. She stopped being hurt. She was looking at the hand-holding scene with something closer to awe. How had her analysis failed this completely? What kind of man maintained this many relationships while rejecting 3 combat-trained women who slept in the same building? No kind of man, because none of it was happening, but she did not have that answer yet. The last stop was the salon. I had been maintaining their magical boiler for 2 months. The owner was a sharp, glamorous woman who ran an establishment for wealthy clients, and the boiler in the basement broke down every few weeks. She had been paying full guild rates until she discovered I would do it for free on my rest days. The basement was cramped. The pipes ran through narrow channels designed for someone half my width. I spent an hour contorting, stretching, forcing mana through corroded seals, and rebuilding cracked junctions with earth magic. And when I finally crawled out, my back had made a decision about my future that I disagreed with but could not override. I could barely stand. The owner helped me to the service door, her arm around my waist, because my lower spine had stopped cooperating. "You were wonderful," she said. She meant the boiler. "I may have pushed it too far." "I meant my lumbar region," she laughed. "The way you got into every corner, every pipe, every joint. I have never seen anyone work that thoroughly." 3 women had been standing in the alley for an hour, listening to the sounds of exertion from the basement, the groaning, the grunting, the sharp gasps when pipe fittings resisted and then gave way. Without the context of a man wrestling corroded plumbing in a space the size of a coffin, those sounds told a very different story. And now they were watching the glamorous owner of a high-class salon press herself against me, call me wonderful, and describe in glowing terms how thoroughly I had worked her establishment's interior. Serena fainted. actually fainted. Mira caught her before she hit the cobblestones, which was the only functional response any of them managed. Elise stood perfectly still, empty eyes, hands at her sides. She looked like a woman who had completed a very long journey and arrived at the wrong destination. I limped home with a ruined back and a deep sense of satisfaction. Sister visited, orphanage roof fixed, receptionist treated, boiler repaired, 4 tasks, all useful, none requiring me to swing a sword or argue with anyone about party rankings. This was what rest days were supposed to feel like. Behind me, 60 paces back, 3 women walked like soldiers returning from a war they had lost. Elise spoke, her voice scraped down to bedrock. Tonight, we confront him. Mira nodded. Her tail dragged on the cobblestones. Her ears had not risen since the orphanage. Serena, barely recovered, pressed her lips together. She had run out of schemes. She had run out of composure. All that remained was the raw, unprotected thing underneath, and it hurt in a way she had no framework for. They believed I was maintaining 4 separate relationships: a young lover, a secret wife and child, a guild receptionist, a salon owner. They believed every rejected advance, every dodged invitation, every night I had knocked myself unconscious was faithfulness to other women. The party that had survived everything was about to eat itself alive over a roof repair, a mana transfer, a back injury, and a hug from my sister. I had no idea. I went home, took a hot bath for my back, and fell asleep on the workshop floor before anyone returned. It was the last peaceful sleep I would get for a while. I noticed them before they noticed me noticing. 3 sets of eyes. Elise behind a fruit stall, pretending to examine apples she had no intention of buying. Serena leaning against a column near the fountain, arms folded, expression carefully neutral. Mira crouched behind a fabric cart, her tail poking out the other side like a tawny flag. They were following me, and the energy coming off them was not the warm, competitive chaos I had grown used to. It was cold and sharp and aimed directly at my chest. I activated stealth, level 1, practically useless against real detection, but I had refined it for years, and in a crowded market with dozens of competing scent trails and visual noise, it was enough to let me slip around a corner and vanish. The last thing I heard was Mira's voice, bewildered and desperate. She said my scent had disappeared completely. Good. That bought me maybe 10 minutes. I did not know what I had done wrong. When your party members look at you like you have betrayed something fundamental and you cannot identify the offense, your options narrow fast. I could stand there and ask, or I could create distance and come back with something useful to say. I chose distance. I always chose distance. The guild was the one place in the city where my presence made sense to everyone, including me. The receptionist looked considerably better than the day before. Color in her face, steady hands. She thanked me again for the wall foundation repair. The guild master had inspected it himself and could not find a single stress point. I told her it was nothing, signed the volunteer log, turned to leave. I did not know 3 women were crouched behind the notice boards 12 paces away, listening to every word. What I learned later was this. After I left, Elise approached the receptionist with something that was technically a smile, but functioned more like a blade. She asked whether the man who had just left was always so familiar with women. The receptionist, who had no idea she was standing at the center of a jealousy crisis, lit up. She told them everything. The boiler that nearly exploded, the orphanage roof, the city wall. She mentioned that my sister had visited from the capital, and she explained that the procedure the day before had been mana supply, a standard treatment delivered through hand contact because that was how the skill worked. 3 women standing in the guild hall, not moving, processing the realization that the boiler was a boiler, the orphanage child was an orphanage child, and the beautiful young woman who had kissed my cheek was my sister. Serena covered her face with both hands. Her voice came out small, but Elise had one thread left. The salon owner's description still needed an answer. Elise was not the kind of person who left a single variable unresolved. I was in the workshop, pressing a compress against my back and drinking tea, when the door slammed open hard enough to rattle the hinges. Elise in the doorway, Serena and Mira behind her, eyes red, postures rigid. They spoke over each other. Mira demanded to know what the boiler was and what I had been doing with that woman inside it. Serena wanted confirmation that the sister was real. Elise cut through both with a single question about the salon owner's description of work that left me unable to walk. I got as far as explaining that the intake pipe was about 2 feet wide and I had been lying on my back in a crawl space for an hour. They did not hear me. 3 voices, 3 accusations, 3 theories of betrayal layered on top of each other like a wall of sound. I tried again. I got halfway through the word plumbing before Mira shouted over me. Then the workshop door creaked open a second time. Clara poked her head through the gap like a small animal checking whether the forest fire had passed. She looked at me, surrounded by the most dangerous women in the city. She looked at their tear-streaked faces. She looked at the tea I was still holding. Her expression brightened. She called me Big Brother. She said these must be the ones from the reports. And then, before I could cross the 3 paces between us and physically close her mouth, she said it. She said that I had written in my diary last night that everyone was too attractive and that keeping my composure was becoming impossible. The room died. Not silence. Something past silence. A vacuum where sound used to exist. I lunged for Clara, told her to stop, that it was private. My face was burning so hot I could feel the heat radiating off my own skin. She dodged me easily. She was 19 and quick. I had a back injury and the reflexes of a man who had just watched his life end. Too late. The word diary was in the air. 3 women who had spent the last day convinced I was maintaining a secret harem were looking at me with an expression I had never seen on any of their faces. Clara handed it over with a wink. She knew exactly what she was doing. It was not a diary, it was an activity report. A thick sheaf of parchment I sent monthly to Clara in the capital. The cover read, Dawn's Perch Activity Report and Development Strategy, in my neatest handwriting. Elise took it. Serena held me still. Mira pinned my arms. I was not going anywhere. Elise read aloud. Training observations, skill assessments, notes on each member with recommendations. Serena's shield stance was flawless, but her rightward step created a gap that could be fatal. I had planned to address it in the next session. Mira's reflexes were exceptional, but she relied too heavily on instinct. I was designing a custom tool specifically for her. Elise's mana efficiency was artisan level, but she carried too much alone. I needed to build her confidence as sub-leader. Professional notes. But underneath every observation was something I had not realized was visible until someone else read it aloud. Every recommendation circled back to one thing. Make sure they never get hurt. Not once. Not ever. Elise's voice wavered on the 3rd page. The section about my former party. How I had failed them by doing too much silently. How my invisible labor bred complacency. How young adventurers like Bram and Lahi suffered because I managed everything instead of teaching anything. A clear-eyed accounting of what I had done wrong and a promise not to repeat it. Then she turned to the last page, the special notes section, written at the edge of consciousness, in handwriting that got progressively worse as the mana depletion set in. She read every word. I had written that there was one critical problem I could not solve professionally, that Elise, Serena, and Mira were, as women, overwhelmingly attractive. That sharing living quarters as a 35-year-old single man made maintaining professional distance genuinely difficult. That the nightly mana depletion, the ritual that left me unconscious on the floor every evening, was not training. It was self-defense. The only method I had found to guarantee my composure would survive another day. I had written that their casual approaches were more terrifying to my self-control than any deep floor monster I had ever faced. 3 faces stared at me, apple red, every single one. The truth was simpler and worse and better than anything they had imagined. I was not a philanderer. I was not oblivious. I was a man who had been knocking himself unconscious every night just to survive being in the same building with them. I wanted the floor of my own workshop to swallow me whole. Elise moved first. She pressed the parchment against her chest, stepped forward, and buried her face in my shoulder. She was crying. Elise, who controlled everything, who never let anyone see the machinery behind her composure, was crying against me and calling me an idiot. The word came out broken and wet, and nothing like the way she usually spoke. Mira hit me second. She wrapped herself around my midsection with the full force of a beastkin who had spent a full day believing the man she loved did not want her. Her tail knocked a set of wrenches off the nearest workbench. She was sobbing and telling me I was her favorite person in the world. Serena was last. She released my arm, wiped her eyes, looked at me with an expression that had nothing calculated in it, just heat. She told me, quiet and steady, that if I was struggling to maintain professional distance, I should stop trying. They would handle the rest. Then she put her arms around me from behind and held on like she was afraid I would disappear again. I stood pinned by 3 women in my own workshop, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything except exist inside a moment I had not planned for and could not have survived if I had seen it coming. Clara watched from the doorway. She told me to give up. She said she wanted sisters-in-law, and the grin on her face made it clear she considered this catastrophe a net positive for the family. I tried to explain. Just a report. Professional documentation. The words came out thin and unconvincing, and nobody in the room believed a single syllable. Elise lifted her head. Her eyes were red and luminous. She asked very quietly if she could keep the report. The way she asked made it sound like she was asking for something far more important than paper. I could not answer. My throat had closed up somewhere around the 3rd page. The wall was still there, the careful distance I had maintained for months, but there were cracks in it now, wide ones, and everyone in the room could see right through them. I closed my eyes. The workshop smelled like tea and wood shavings, and 3 different kinds of perfume I had been pretending not to notice for longer than I cared to admit. The slow life was over. I had a feeling it had been over for a while, and I was the last person to figure it out. There is a particular kind of stupidity that cannot be taught. It has to be grown over years in soil made entirely of praise no one earned. Roland had spent his whole career standing on ground I built and calling it his own talent. When the ground was pulled out, he did not learn to stand. He sat down in an alley and blamed the ground. I was not there when it happened. I pieced it together later from the Guildmaster's report, but the sequence was simple enough that even Roland could follow it, which was exactly the point. A demon found him, not a strategist, just something old and patient that recognized desperation the way a hunter recognizes a limping animal. It wore a robe and spoke in the kind of voice that made compliments sound like facts. Roland had always been susceptible to that particular trick. The demon told him what he wanted to hear, that he had been wronged, that his power was real, that the city would worship him again if he simply gave them a reason to. It offered a stone, pulsing with a sickly violet light, and called it a tool for summoning a few monsters, manageable ones, the kind Roland could destroy with his level 10 magic and look heroic doing it. Roland took the stone without asking a single question about it. He smashed it outside the city walls with a speech already forming in his head, something about protecting the people of Herafutin. The speech did not finish. What the stone actually did was send a signal into every layer of the Felwy labyrinth, driving every monster in the region into a berserk frenzy. Not a handful, not a manageable wave, tens of thousands. Flying beasts that blackened the sky, ground swarms of orcs and goblins stretching to the horizon, deep layer creatures that had no business being above ground at all. Roland did not survive what he invited. The first wave swallowed him before he could scream. A man who measured everything by level discovered, at the end, that a level 10 shield means nothing when 10,000 things hit it at once. The demon watched from a safe distance. It had gotten exactly what it wanted. The alarm bells hit mid-sentence. I had been in my workshop, enduring what could generously be called an ambush. 3 women, 1 sister, and more emotional honesty than I had experienced in the previous 35 years combined. The diary fallout from the day before had not settled. It was not going to settle, but the bells cut through all of it like a blade through paper. 4 sharp strikes. Pause. 4 more. The stampede pattern. Every trace of warmth left my body in under a second. The heat in my face, the embarrassment, the half-formed excuses I had been assembling since yesterday, all of it gone, replaced by something older and colder. The part of me that had spent years keeping people alive in places where the margin for error was measured in heartbeats. Everyone, weapons, now. My voice came out flat and low. I did not recognize it for a moment, and then I did. It was the voice I used in dungeons when something went wrong on the deep floors. The voice that meant counting was over and action had started. Elise shifted first. The softness from yesterday vanished from her face like it had never existed. Serena was a half-second behind, already reaching for the blade she kept near the door. Mira's ears snapped upright, and the playful warmth in her expression was replaced by something that looked a great deal like a predator hearing prey. "How many?" Elise asked. No preamble, no fear, pure operational. I crossed to the window and looked out. The sky beyond the defensive wall was wrong, too dark, moving. The darkness had texture, wings. More than 10,000, I said. The wall is already surrounded, full perimeter. Bram appeared at my side, his jaw set, his hand on his sword. Lottie was behind him, silent, watching me with the steady gaze she always wore when things turned serious. Clara stood in the doorway, her travel satchel still on her shoulder, looking at me with an expression that said she had always known this version of her brother existed. "I am going to reinforce the wall with a barrier. The rest of you link up with the defense teams and hold any breach point. Do not try to push them back. Buy time." I looked at Bram. "You are coming with me." "Where?" "The front line. The densest concentration." Nobody asked why. They moved. Elise took command of the remaining group with a single nod, and they were gone in seconds. I grabbed my gear. Bram grabbed his sword. We went to war. The wall gave me the picture I needed, and the picture was bad. The top-ranked adventurers of Herafutin were already deployed. Every one of them was fighting, and every one of them was losing. The monster wave was not the kind of threat that individual skill could answer. A level 8 swordsman could kill 10, 20, maybe 50 if they were reckless with their stamina. But the wave behind those 50 was another 500, and behind those was another 5,000. And the math did not work no matter how many heroes you threw at it. The defensive line had been holding for minutes. It would not hold for many more. 200 fighters against tens of thousands of monsters was not a fight. It was a countdown. I needed area destruction, massive, sustained, and continuous. One weapon that could kill hundreds at a time, firing dozens of times without stopping. I looked at Bram. He was the only person in this city with level 10 attack magic. His explosion spell could annihilate a section of the horde with a single cast, but a single cast consumed more than half his mana pool. 2 casts, and he would collapse. 3, and he might die, unless someone kept filling the tank. Every night for years, I had drained my mana to 0 by building and dissolving hundreds of stone structures in my workshop. It had started as a way to exhaust myself enough to sleep, and then it became discipline, and then it became something else entirely. My mana capacity had grown past 7,000, an absurd number for a level 1 caster, a number that had no practical use for a man whose strongest spell built a small wall. Until now. Bram, I put my hand on his shoulder. I need you to listen carefully. He turned. His eyes were wide but steady. A good student. My best student. I am going to supply you with mana, continuously. You are not going to run out. You are not going to feel the bottom of your reserves, because there will not be a bottom. I need you to cast Explosion, level 10, full power, and I need you to keep casting it until I tell you to stop, or until you physically cannot lift your arms. He stared at me. How much mana do you have? Enough for about 100 casts, I said, if your body can hold together. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. 100 level 10 explosions. The kind of magic that kingdoms marshaled armies to produce one of. I was offering him 100, fed from a pool built one silent night at a time in a workshop no one visited. Are you ready? I asked. He set his jaw, lifted his sword. The blade caught the firelight from the burning horizon. Yes, master. I placed my hand on the center of Bram's back and activated mana supply. The connection opened like a floodgate. My mana poured into him, not in a trickle, but in a river. He gasped, his body tensed, and then he understood. The first explosion tore through the front ranks of the stampede. A column of fire climbed into the sky, and when it cleared, hundreds of monsters were ash. The ground where they had been was a scorched crater. The second one hit before the smoke from the first had settled. Then the third. Each detonation was a world-ending sound. The wall behind us shook. The adventurers on top of it stopped fighting and stared. I did not blame them. What Bram was doing was not supposed to be possible. A level 10 explosion required more mana than most casters possessed in their entire body. Firing 2 in a row would empty any mage in the country. Firing 3 would kill them. Bram fired the 4th, the 5th, the 6th. I do not understand this, he said between casts, his voice raw. My mana is not dropping. It is not even close to dropping. It feels like there is an ocean behind me. There was. 7,000 units of it, built one stone castle at a time. I said nothing. I kept my hand on his back and I kept the supply open. Simultaneously, I ran recovery through my other hand, cycling healing energy into his muscles and nervous system. Level 10 magic put enormous strain on the body. Without the recovery, his arms would have given out by the 10th cast. His heart would have given out by the 20th. The count climbed. 10. The sky above the eastern approach was clear of flying beasts. Bram had turned them into falling embers. 20. The ground forces in the northern corridor broke formation. Whatever herd instinct had driven them forward was shattered by the wall of fire in their path. 30. The adventurers on the wall had stopped fighting entirely. There was nothing left to fight in the sectors Bram had already cleared. I watched my reserves. 6,000, 5,000. The drain was steady and enormous. Each cast took roughly 70 from my pool. Recovery cost another 15 per cycle. I was burning through my entire life's training at a rate I could track in real time. 40, 50. Bram was screaming now, not in pain, in something beyond pain. His body had passed through exhaustion into a state where only the mana flowing through him was keeping his muscles responding. I fed him more recovery. His arms kept moving. His voice kept coming. 60. The western approach was clear. Burning fields stretched to the horizon. 70. My reserves dropped below 2,000. I adjusted the flow. Slightly less mana per cast, slightly more recovery. The explosions were fractionally smaller. Bram did not notice. The monsters did not care about the difference. 80. I was under 1,000. 90. 500. I could feel the emptiness approaching. The familiar sensation from 1,000 nights of training. The bottom of the well. The place where your body says stop and you have to decide whether to listen. I decided not to listen. 95. 300. Bram was barely conscious. His arms moved by reflex. His eyes were open but unfocused. The explosions still came, each one a hammer blow that shook the earth and turned another 100 monsters into nothing. 98. 150. The last significant cluster was directly ahead, a tight mass of deep layer creatures, the biggest and ugliest things the labyrinth had to offer, packed together in a wall of scales and teeth. 99. 100. The final explosion was the largest. I emptied everything I had left into it. Bram roared. The spell erupted from his blade in a pillar of fire that climbed higher than the city wall, higher than the towers, high enough that I lost sight of the top in the smoke. The sound was not a sound. It was a physical thing that hit my chest and drove the air from my lungs. When it cleared, there was nothing left. The plain in front of Herafutin was a scorched wasteland. Craters overlapped craters. Smoke rose in columns that merged into a single dark ceiling. The stampede was gone. Tens of thousands of monsters, the entire berserk wave that had threatened to erase the city, reduced to ash by one young man with a sword and one old handyman with a monopool nobody knew about. Bram's knees buckled. I caught him before he hit the ground. Did we? His voice was barely a whisper. Did we do it? You did it, I said. Every single one of them. His eyes closed. He was smiling. The others reached us within minutes. Elise came down from the wall first, moving fast, scanning for injuries. The guildmaster was behind her with a cluster of top-ranked adventurers who looked like they had forgotten how to speak. Clara was there too, her travel satchel still on her shoulder, because my sister had apparently decided that a monster stampede was not sufficient reason to stay indoors. I had about 4 seconds to make a decision. What followed was, in my professional opinion, one of the finest performances of cowardice in Herafutin's recorded history. I let my legs give out. This part was not entirely acting. My mana reserves were at 0. My body felt like someone had replaced my bones with wet cloth. But the degree to which I exaggerated the collapse was, I will admit, significant. Oh, thank the gods, I gasped, making my voice crack in a way that suggested a man who had just watched his life flash before his eyes, rather than a man who had just powered 100 apocalyptic detonations. Bram, are you alive? Someone check on Bram. He saved us. He saved all of us. I grabbed the front of Bram's armor with shaking hands. The shaking was about 40% genuine exhaustion and 60% theater. I was sweating, which was real. I was pale, which was also real. I looked, by all objective measures, like a terrified old man who had been dragged to the front line against his will and survived only because a young hero had done everything. I could not move, I said to the guildmaster, who was staring at me with an expression I could not read. I was so scared I could not even run. Bram did everything. He is incredible, a genius, the greatest mage this city has ever seen. I just held onto his back and tried not to die. The guildmaster opened his mouth. Please do not make me go out there again, I added, letting a small whimper into my voice. I am not built for this. I am a handyman. I fix boilers. It worked on most of them. The adventurers on the wall saw Bram casting. They did not see the mana supply. They did not see the recovery. What they saw was a young man performing an impossible feat, and behind him, a middle-aged man who was very clearly not responsible for any of it. The guildmaster frowned, but said nothing. He ordered Bram carried to the infirmary and the wall secured. He looked at me one more time, and I gave him the most convincingly pathetic expression I could manage on 0 mana. Then I looked past him. Elise was watching me. Her arms were crossed. Her expression was the one she wore when she had solved a problem and was deciding whether to announce the answer. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The look on her face said she knew exactly how much mana I had, exactly how Bram had fired 100 level 10 spells without collapsing, and exactly how much of my current performance was genuine. Clara was beside her. My sister's expression was identical. The family resemblance in that moment was striking. Both of them let me try. I slipped away while the recovery teams were organizing. My legs barely worked. My vision was tunneling. The walk back to my workshop took 4 times longer than it should have because I had to stop twice and lean against walls to keep from falling over. But I made it. I closed the door. I sat down on the floor of my workshop in the dark with 0 mana and the sound of my own heartbeat the only thing I could hear. The city was safe. Bram was the hero. I was the terrified old man who fixed boilers. And if I was very lucky, tomorrow morning, that would still be the story everyone believed. I closed my eyes. I was asleep before my head touched the stone. My cover story lasted approximately 6 hours. Bram woke up at dawn, looked at the medics and adventurers surrounding his cot, and began shouting. The words carried through 2 walls and a closed door. "The real hero is my master." He stood behind me and poured mana into me without stopping. I was sitting in the corridor, listening to my slow life evaporate in real time. I walked into the infirmary and did something I had never done since forming Dawn's Perch. "Bram, leader authority, I am ordering you to stop." The room fell silent. I had never pulled rank on him, not once. "Tell them you did it alone. That is the official story." His jaw clenched. "I will not build my name on a lie about you. If you disobey, you are out of the party." Bram looked at the floor and said nothing. I allowed myself one quiet celebration. The cover held. The invincible information suppression of the greatest handyman alive had prevailed once again. Then Lahi opened her mouth. "Bram is telling the truth." She said it quietly, directly to the guildmaster, who had been standing in the corner taking notes. Ethan supplied mana to Bram the entire time. He threatened to expel Bram just now to keep himself hidden. I stared at her. She stared back with the expression of someone who was very sorry but was not going to stop. The guildmaster nodded, pulled out parchment, and began writing. That confirms what I suspected. Elise met my eyes with a look that said she had been waiting for this. Mira tilted her head and gave me the flattest stare I had ever received from someone with wolf ears. "The individual contribution record has been updated," the guildmaster said. "You will also be receiving formal recognition from the city lord. Please do not attempt to flee." I sat on the nearest cot and covered my face with both hands. I went alone. Recovery teams worked the perimeter. I slipped past them using stealth and walked to the far edge of the devastation field where the stampede had originated. I found him in a shallow depression, half buried by churned earth. His expensive armor was cracked open like an eggshell. The Heaven's Crown insignia was gone from his cloak. He was already gone. That was all there was to say about it. I stood there for a while, not grieving. Roland did not earn grief from me, but I had trained him once, years ago, before his pride calcified into the only thing he could see. I had watched a decent swordsman turn into a man who measured everything by level numbers and nothing by what it cost to stay alive. If I had been better at reaching him, would he have ended up here? Probably. Some people build their own cages, but the question sat in my chest like a stone, and I let it sit there. Something glinted near his feet, a fragment of crystal, the color of a deep bruise, purple so dark it was almost black, pulsing faintly. I did not touch it with bare skin. I pulled a cloth from my belt, wrapped it carefully, and held it up to the light. Analysis told me what I needed. This was not a natural monster stone. It was manufactured, designed to attract deep layer creatures in massive numbers and drive them into a frenzy. The stampede had not been random. Someone had built this thing, handed it to a desperate man, and pointed him at the city. I used construction magic to raise a small stone marker from the ground. No name. I could not give him that, but he had been an adventurer once. "Next time," I said to nobody, "try living within your means." I pocketed the fragment and walked back toward the city. The serious part of my day ended the moment I stepped through my own front door. Elise was sitting on the sofa with her legs crossed, wearing that particular expression she reserved for moments when she had thought about something very carefully, and I was not going to enjoy the results. "Welcome back," she said. "We need to discuss mana supply efficiency." I did not like the word efficiency. I did not like the way Serena was standing behind my chair, positioned between me and the exit. I especially did not like the way Mira was already grinning. "During the stampede," Elise continued, leaning forward, "you transferred 7,000 mana through palm contact on Bram's back. Impressive, but research suggests that increased surface area of skin-to-skin contact dramatically improves mana conduction rates." She paused. "I would like to propose a controlled experiment." "No, you have not heard the parameters." "I do not need to hear the parameters." She stood up slowly and took a step toward me, then another. Her hand moved to the collar of her robe and pulled it aside, just enough that the fabric slipped down one shoulder. The collarbone underneath was exactly as slender as I had been trying not to notice for months. My brain performed an emergency threat assessment. The result was catastrophic. Elise was not the type I could brush off through sheer willpower. She was precisely, surgically, devastatingly, the type I could not handle. She knew this. The diary had told her, and she was advancing. "Cooperation time," Serena announced from behind me. Her arms locked around both of mine with a grip that could have bent iron. I could not move. "I am also helping." Mira appeared from somewhere, reaching for my belt with an enthusiasm that had no strategic calculation behind it whatsoever. She was simply happy. My body had one option left. I channeled every point of mana I had. all 7,000, not into a spell, not into a shield, into barriers, tiny, disposable 1 mana cost barriers stacked between us at a rate that would have made a siege engineer weep with confusion. 7,000 barriers in the space of a heartbeat. A wall of shimmering light pushed all 3 of them gently backward. The mana cost was total. My reserves dropped from full to absolute 0 in under a second. Sorry, I managed. Out of mana. My vision went dark. My knees buckled. I hit the floor face first and the world switched off like a blown candle. The last thing I heard from very far away was Elise's voice. Did he just burn 7,000 mana creating barriers to faint on purpose? He did. Because the alternative was remaining conscious in a room with Elise's collarbone, and that was a battle even 7,000 mana could not win. I woke up on my workshop floor hours later, alone, with a blanket I had not placed there. The women had left a note on my workbench. Next time, we will wait until after you have depleted your mana naturally. This was not a threat. This was a schedule. I wrapped the cursed stone fragment in fresh cloth, activated stealth to dodge the grateful citizens in the streets, and made my way to the guild through every back alley in the city. The guild master's office was quiet. I placed the fragment on his desk. I found this at the Stampede origin point, near Roland's body. He triggered the Stampede, but he did not make this. Someone gave it to him. The guild master unwrapped it, looked at the dull purple crystal, and went pale. A frenzy stone fragment. Deep layer monster attractant. This confirms it. The Stampede was engineered. Roland was not smart enough to source this alone. Something with access to deep layer magic put this in his hands and aimed him at the city. I will contact the investigation division and the capital immediately. He locked the fragment in a reinforced drawer, then straightened. He was not done. There is one more matter. He pulled a heavy envelope from a different drawer. Gold thread embroidery. A wax seal I did not recognize. The city lord has issued a formal invitation. Dawn's Perch is to attend a banquet tomorrow evening as honored guests. The lord was impressed by your party's rescue operations, he continued. Elise, Serena, Mira, and Lahi saved every top-ranked adventurer on the wall without a single casualty. He wishes to honor that personally. And there is a dress code, I said. There is a dress code. I took the envelope. It was heavier than it had any right to be. I had saved the city, buried the man who nearly destroyed it, survived 3 women trying to undress me for science. And now I was being summoned to a noble's dinner party where I would need to pretend I knew which fork was for salad. I will be there, I said, because what else could I say? The guildmaster smiled the smile of a man handing someone a sentence, not an honor. I walked home through the back alleys, the invitation in my jacket, wondering at what point doing the right thing had become the most efficient method of destroying my own peace. The noble invitation sat on my workbench like a small, elegant bomb. Tomorrow evening, the Lord's mansion, full formal dress code. We were the guests of honor. The panic was immediate. I do not own a gown, Elise said flatly. None of us do. Mira tugged at her vest. There is no way to get 4 gowns fitted by tomorrow. Serena shook her head. Nothing off a rack would fit all of us. She had a point. Mira alone would destroy any standard garment within seconds of breathing. I pulled out the bolts of plain fabric I had picked up at the market, cheap cotton and basic linen. Next to them, I set out my sewing kit. I will handle it. Go get some sleep. Elise's eyes narrowed. And the measurements? Already have them. I repair your armor every week. Combat fitting requires millimeter precision. I have had your dimensions memorized since the 2nd month. The room went quiet. 4 faces flushed red in unison. They had read the diary. They knew the man who recorded their measurements to the millimeter was the same man who knocked himself unconscious every night because he could not trust himself conscious around them. They left, eventually. I worked through the night. Fabric has properties. Thread count, drape, elasticity. Same as ore. I activated my crafting, material enhancement, structural analysis, and mana manipulation. Individually, each was level 1. Combined, they turned cheap cotton into something that moved like silk and caught lamplight like woven starlight. Midnight blue for Elise. Clean lines. Open back, the neckline framing her collarbone. Her flat chest was not a flaw to hide. It was a canvas for structure. White mermaid cut for Serena, emphasizing the waist, honoring the knightly bearing she carried in her bones. Deep crimson for Mira, structurally reinforced at the fiber level, with mana woven into the thread itself. Because no conventional garment could contain her, a high slit for movement. She would look like a fire, given human shape. Soft rose pink for Lahi, gentle, full-skirted, designed to make her feel safe while looking beautiful. Nothing that demanded attention, but everything that deserved it. By dawn, 4 gowns hung from the rack. I checked the stitching one final time. Flawless. Professional habit. The next evening, Bram and I waited by the carriage in the suits I had put together that morning. Then, the 4 of them walked out. Elise came first. The midnight blue caught the sunset and turned her into something from a painting. Silver thread traced constellations at the hem when she moved. She stopped in front of me. How do I look? My throat did something unhelpful. Serena followed, white fabric flowing like armor made of moonlight. She raised one eyebrow at my expression and smiled the way a woman smiles when she has already won. Mira bounded out in crimson. The structural engineering held, barely. The chest is a little tight, she announced to everyone within earshot. Lottie appeared last, pink and blushing. Bram whispered something that made his own ears turn red. I had designed each gown to maximize the features I found most devastating about each of them. This had seemed professional at the time. It was not. You all look wonderful, I managed. My voice was steady. My hands were not. Elise took my left arm. Mira took my right. Serena placed her hand on my back with the precision of someone closing an escape route. The Lord's mansion was everything I expected and nothing I was prepared for. Marble floors polished to mirror finish. Chandeliers the size of small carriages. Nobles in silk and gold turning to stare as 6 adventurers walked in, wearing handmade gowns that somehow looked more expensive than anything in the room. The fabric had cost less than lunch. The craftsmanship was free. That part was satisfying. The ceremony started with Bram. The Lord praised the stampede suppression in terms that would have made a bard weep, then delivered the reward. A barony, land, title, formal rank, already reported to the crown. I nearly punched the air. Bram would become the Baron. I would remain his unremarkable former mentor. My slow life would resume tomorrow. Bram dropped to one knee. I must refuse. His voice rang across the ballroom. Every drop of mana I used was supplied by my master. Every wound I took was healed by his hands. Every order that kept the line from breaking came from his voice. He looked over his shoulder at me, beaming. The barony belongs to him. Lottie was blushing beside him. Bram added, quieter, that having her smile was reward enough. The ballroom collectively melted. I did not. I smiled at him. It was the smile of a man memorizing which training exercises would cause the most suffering starting next week. The Lord stroked his chin. The barony had been reported to the crown, he explained. Someone had to accept it. Given Ethan's additional contributions, infrastructure, volunteer work, Stampede Command, well, it would be most appropriate if the master accepted what the disciple had refused. Baron Ethan, the Lord said. With the title comes a workshop tax exemption and the formal responsibilities of minor nobility, including the duty to establish a lineage. Multiple wives are not merely permitted for a newly elevated baron, they are expected. Behind me, 3 sharp intakes of breath, perfectly synchronized. Multiple wives, Elise said softly, doing math. Serena leaned forward, legally recognized. Mira's tail went rigid. So we never had to fight each other at all. I turned around. 3 women in gowns I had personally crafted were looking at me with an expression I can only describe as a predator alliance forming in real time. The competition evaporated. The alliance was born. No more excuses, Ethan. Elise's smile could have cut glass. We will take excellent care of you, Serena added, and the warmth was genuine and terrifying. Mira announced her intentions regarding children at full volume to the entire ballroom. The nobles applauded. The Lord roared with laughter. Bram shouted congratulations, while Lottie blushed beside him. I stood in the most beautiful trap ever constructed and understood that my slow life had been dead for months, and I was only now attending the funeral. Days later, the royal summons arrived, the crown seal. The king wanted to meet the newly elevated baron and his party. I made it to the labyrinth entrance in 7 minutes flat. I spent 20 minutes in the dark, breathing stone air, convincing myself this was a perfectly reasonable patrol. Then the darkness spoke. Found you. Mira's voice came from directly behind me. Your scent does not lie. Elise sealed the corridor ahead. Her mana detection had mapped my position before I stopped moving. They dragged me back to the workshop, one on each arm. Serena was waiting with an etiquette manual and a teaching rod. I grew up in a knight household, she said pleasantly. Court protocol, formal address, table etiquette, I know all of it, and I will teach you everything. Until morning. She was not exaggerating. The lesson lasted until dawn. I learned 7 forms of address, 4 bow variations, the correct placement of 11 pieces of silverware, and the counterintuitive fact that a baron ranks above a knight, but below a viscount, but parallel to a baronet, except in the southern provinces, where the system inverts entirely. By morning, I could recite the king's formal title without stumbling and wished for nothing except to fight monsters, which at least had the decency to be straightforward. The Lord's carriage was obscenely comfortable. Bram and Lahi had the second one to themselves. I was not so lucky. Elise sat close enough that her shoulder touched mine with every sway. Mira's tail had found its way across my lap in a gesture she called accidental and repeated constantly. Serena sat opposite, her etiquette corrections requiring her to lean forward and physically adjust my posture at intervals that felt strategically calibrated. Elise wanted to explore the arcane libraries. Mira wanted a beastkin restaurant from her homeland. Serena promised to continue the protocol lessons privately. Each announcement was delivered with the specific warmth of a woman staking territory. I stared out the window and wondered if the monsters would find me before the city did. My search skill caught it first, a heaviness in the air, the density that meant monsters in numbers. "Weapons out," I said, and the carriage comedy evaporated. Through the trees, another carriage overturned. Knights scattered on the ground, a swarm of monsters pouring from the tree line, more than should exist this close to the capital road. I gave orders before the carriage stopped. Elise, Serena, and Mira on the right flank. Bram to burn the left. I would cut through the center. I activated everything at once. Wind and earth magic layered together. One to cut, one to shield. I carved through the swarm to the overturned carriage. One passenger inside. An old man, white-haired, sheltered behind the body of a knight who had spent his last moments as a wall. Behind me, stay low. I raised a stone barrier around him. Construction magic reinforced with durability enhancement. The wall hardened in seconds. Nothing short of a siege weapon was getting through. Behind me, Elise took monsters apart with precision. Serena cut through the right flank. Mira was a crimson blur. Bram's explosions lit the canopy from the left. 3 minutes. The swarm was done. I dissolved the barrier and helped the old man to his feet. He was shaken but uninjured. My barrier had taken every hit meant for him. His hand gripped mine with surprising strength, and the look in his eyes was not fear, it was assessment. "Remarkable," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a man accustomed to being listened to. "You built a fortress around a stranger without hesitating. Anyone would have done the same." His smile said he had met enough people to know that was a lie. "I am merely a traveler, but I will not forget this. What is your name?" "Ethan." Baron Ethan, apparently. Something shifted behind his eyes. Recognition, or the beginning of an idea. "Baron Ethan, I have a feeling we will meet again very soon." I helped him into our carriage. He was quiet for the rest of the journey, polite but watching. His gaze kept returning to me with an intensity my stealth skill could not deflect. Something did not add up. The dead knight's armor was too fine for a merchant's escort. The wrecked carriage had been built to government standard, and the old man's hands, calloused not from labor, but from decades of holding a pen. I filed it away. The capital walls were visible on the horizon now, white stone glinting in the late afternoon sun. Whatever waited behind those walls, I was walking toward it with 3 women whose alliance was specifically designed to ensure I never had a quiet evening again. An apprentice who had gifted me a barony through sincere stupidity, and an old man whose gratitude felt more dangerous than the monsters I had just killed. The slow life had never started. I was beginning to suspect it never would. The capital's audience chamber smelled like wealth that had been sitting still for centuries. Cold stone, old incense, and the specific silence that happens when 200 people are watching you and none of them are on your side. We stood in a line before the throne, Elise to my left, Serena to my right, Mira behind me, radiating warmth through my suit jacket. Bram was grinning like he had already forgotten what formality meant. The assembled nobles watched us with the frigid curiosity of people who had been born into titles we stumbled into yesterday. The king acknowledged us from a throne that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of white stone. Our handling of the stampede had been reported. Service noted. Bravery commended. Standard praise. Delivered with the standard authority of a man who had given this speech enough times to do it without thinking. I kept my eyes forward and calculated how quickly I could get us back on the road. 2 days, maybe. 1 if I could convince them to skip the formal dinner. Then the doors to the left of the throne opened, and the old man walked in. He looked different. The travel-worn robes were gone, replaced with formal court attire that fit him like a second skin. But the way the entire room shifted when he entered, every noble straightening, every guard adjusting posture, told me everything I had missed on the road. The old man I had pulled from a wrecked carriage was Duke Valerius, the king's most trusted advisor, the single single most powerful noble in the kingdom outside the royal family. I had built him a stone barricade and told him to stay behind it while I handled the monsters. I had checked his pulse with the same efficiency I used on injured adventurers. I had offered him water from my canteen. Valerius looked directly at me and smiled the way someone smiles when they have been holding a card face down and are about to flip it. He turned to the king with a formal recommendation. A man who saves lives without asking for rank or reward, he said, should not hold a title that dies with him. He proposed my barony be made hereditary. Lands, lineage, permanent obligations. A name that outlasts the man who earned it. I stood perfectly still while my future sealed itself shut around me. The king agreed as though he had been waiting for someone to suggest it. Behind me, 3 distinct reactions. Elise inhaled sharply, the strategist recognizing an institutional lock. Serena's posture shifted to knight family validation. Mira's tail started swinging so hard it clipped Bram's elbow. A hereditary barony meant heirs. Heirs meant children. Children meant the 3 women behind me now had legal, crown-endorsed justification for every plan they had been running since the night I made them those dresses. My slow life was already dead. This was the funeral, and the mourners were celebrating. I was still processing the hereditary barony when the main doors slammed open hard enough to echo off the vaulted ceiling. A young woman in a gold-trimmed gown came through at a pace that was not quite a run, bright golden hair whipping behind her, and in both arms she carried a device made of interlocking crystal arrays and brass gears, spitting dangerous violet sparks in every direction. Behind her, court mages chased with expressions combining terror, exhaustion, and the despair of professionals who have already failed. She announced that the ancient barrier device had malfunctioned. The capital's defensive barrier was failing. Every noble took a step back. Ancient magical devices were not repaired. They were studied from a safe distance by people who published papers about why no one should touch them. I looked at the device. The problem was obvious. Monocircuit blockage from centuries of residue buildup. 2 internal gears misaligned by a fraction of a hair. A microfracture in the crystal mounting bracket. I was standing in front of her before I realized I had moved. "Excuse me, may I see that?" My hands were already working. Mana manipulation cleared the blockage. Repair skill restored the pathway. Tool creation generated a replacement gear and seated it. The fracture sealed under bonded material. A soft click. The violet sparks vanished. The device settled into a steady, clean blue glow. The kind of light that happens when something is working the way it was designed to work, probably for the first time in several hundred years. Better than factory specifications. I could feel it humming against my palms like a well-tuned instrument. The court mages had stopped moving. One was opening and closing his mouth without producing sound. Another had sat down on the marble floor, which I suspected was not protocol. The princess looked at the device, then at me. Something happened in her eyes that I recognized from years of working with competent people who had just identified a resource they intended to acquire. Valerius stepped forward and informed the princess that I was the newly elevated hereditary Baron Ethan, a hero risen from the common ranks. And, he added with surgical precision, I was legally authorized to take multiple wives. The old man had not been grateful. He had been recruiting. The princess turned to the king and declared, in a voice that carried to every corner, that she intended to become one of my wives. Elise, Serena, and Mira planted themselves between me and the princess in a formation so coordinated it had to have been practiced. Elise informed the princess, in a voice that could frost marble, that I already had fiancés and that even royalty should respect the order of claims. Serena suggested that using royal authority to take someone else's husband would reflect poorly on the crown. Mira said my side belonged to them, and her ears flattened in a way that made several courtiers retreat further. The princess did not flinch. She looked at the 3 of them the way a chess player looks at pieces that are well positioned but playing the wrong game entirely. She offered to duel all 3 of them for the position of primary wife. She sounded genuinely excited about it. I was about to intervene, though with what argument I had no idea, when the chancellor emerged from beside the throne, thin, precise, wearing spectacles that suggested he had never found a regulation he could not enforce. He stated the law. A princess marrying below her rank required the husband to hold at least marquis title. A baron was insufficient by several ranks. Relief hit me like cold water. The princess immediately suggested the king promote me to marquis, right now. She said it the way someone suggests opening a window. The king shook his head. Marquis rank required a historic achievement. Fixing one device was not enough. I nearly wept. The Marquis barrier was the first solid wall between myself and this woman, and I intended to hide behind it for the rest of my life. The princess smiled. It was the kind of smile that told me the wall was not going to hold. Valerius pointed out that the device repair was itself a historic achievement. The king elevated me to Viscount on the spot, one rank closer. Then the king issued the real trap, a royal mission: find the mastermind behind the cursed stones that triggered the stampede. The guildmaster's intelligence had reached the capital. If I succeeded, Marquis rank, and the marriage. I saw the design instantly, refused the mission, and the stampede threat remained. The people I cared about stayed in danger. Succeed, and I became a marquise, which meant the princess got what she wanted. Both paths ended at the same door. The only variable was how many people got hurt along the way. The three women standing in front of me were my last line of defense. They had blocked the princess's first charge. They would hold. The princess stepped around them. She did not push through. She simply walked to Serena first and spoke too quietly for me to hear. I watched Serena's composed mask hold for 3 seconds. Then something cracked, something old and deep. The princess was talking about her family, the Knight lineage declining for generations, titles stripped, lands reduced. Serena had carried that weight in silence since the day I met her. The princess offered full restoration, ancestral titles returned, lands reconfirmed. And if Serena bore children within my barony, those children would receive guaranteed noble rank. Serena's hand trembled at her side. She closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, the conflict was already over. She curtsied, a perfect practiced Knight family curtsy that her ancestors had probably taught her before she could walk. The kind that meant acceptance. The kind that meant the family came first. She did not look at me. I understood why. One down. Mira was next. Whatever the princess said made Mira's ears rotate forward and her tail go completely still. And Mira's tail was never still. Tribal leadership. Political authority over her home community. Not for Mira personally, for everyone she had left behind. Mira looked at me with enormous wet eyes, filled with something I had never seen in them before: conflict. Mira did not do conflict. She decided, she acted, she committed. But this was not about her wanting something. This was about her people needing something. And the princess had known the difference. Her tail started swinging again. She crossed to the princess's side with the heavy steps of someone carrying a decision that would outlast them. 2 down. Elise stood alone. Do not bother. Her voice could have stopped a charging beast. I am an elf. Human titles mean nothing to me. I know what he prefers, and I have exactly what he prefers. She meant her body. She had read my diary. She knew with documented certainty that I found her specific build more attractive than any alternative. That knowledge was her fortress. The princess pulled a small glass vial from her gown. She described its contents: an ancient formula from the deepest vault of the royal treasury. A single drop would change the one thing Elise had spent centuries wishing she could change, the one insecurity she had never admitted to anyone. Elise went white. Her fingers curled into fists. The princess pressed harder. A living branch from the kingdom's world tree grove. Unrestricted access. For an elf separated from her homeland for nearly 4 centuries, it was not a research opportunity. It was a piece of home. The silence was the loudest thing in the chamber. Serena and Mira watched from the princess's side. They had never seen Elise's face look like this. The analytical control that defined her was gone. Something raw and ancient had taken its place. That, Elise said quietly, is beneath you, Your Highness. The princess did not apologize. She did not pretend it was fair. Royalty exists to be ruthless when ruthlessness serves the kingdom, she said, and she did not dress it up. Another silence, longer than the first. I will help complete the mission, Elise said. She paused, then asked, without changing expression, if she could hold on to the vial for research purposes. The princess handed it over. Her smile said everything. 3 down. The princess turned to me. I had watched the entire bribery operation from 10 feet away, close enough to see every expression change, but too far to hear the specific offers. I had watched my 3 most capable allies, women who had faced dungeon bosses and stampede armies without flinching, get systematically dismantled by a girl who had never held a sword in her life. She was smarter than me. She had assessed every person I cared about, identified the one thing each of them wanted more than anything, and offered it. Not threats, not lies. Real offers backed by real resources. I could not even be angry about it. It was the most competent thing I had ever watched anyone do. She had not exploited their flaws. She had exploited their virtues: family honor, tribal duty, ancient longing. Each offer was aimed at the strongest part of each woman, not the weakest. That was the part I could not fight. She approached me and delivered the final piece. My sister Clara would be brought into the royal palace as the princess's personal attendant, protected, educated, guaranteed a future no political shift could threaten. I felt the last door close. Not because it was a threat. The princess was not threatening my sister. She was offering Clara the safest possible life in the kingdom, and she was offering it because she understood something about me that I had never told anyone. I would trade everything for that girl's safety. Everything. And someone who held Clara's well-being in their hands held mine. Protection and leverage in one clean stroke. I had to admire the craftsmanship, even as it locked around me. Fine, I said. I will find your mastermind. I will end the stampede threat, and I will become a marquise, because apparently that is what happens to men who fix plumbing for princesses. The chamber erupted. Nobles applauded. The king looked like a man who had successfully passed his most troublesome daughter to someone else and was trying not to show his relief. Valerius watched with the satisfied expression of someone whose long game had played out exactly as designed. I stood in the center of it and felt the specific exhaustion of a man who had been outplayed in every dimension by someone who was not even trying to hide it. The slow life was not coming back. I had known that for a while now, but standing in that audience chamber, watching a princess younger than my adventuring career dismantle my entire support structure in under an hour, I understood something I had been avoiding since the day I walked out of Heaven's Crown. From the moment I fixed that old man's carriage on the road, the path had been set. I did good work. Good work got noticed. Getting noticed got me more work. And the cycle would not stop, because stopping would mean becoming the kind of person who could watch a broken thing and walk away. I could not do that. That was who I was. The princess had known it before I did. The royal guest house had been quiet for an hour when I noticed Elise had not come to dinner. Serena mentioned it first. Something about Elise wanting time alone, her tone too casual to be casual. Mira's ears had flattened once, briefly. Then she went back to eating with the forced enthusiasm of someone trying not to think. I watched the hallway toward Elise's room, and the light under her door did not change for a long time. After the other two retired, I stood outside that door and knocked before I could talk myself out of it. Elise, you missed dinner? Silence. Then, so quiet I almost missed it through the oak. I am not hungry. Her voice was wrong. Not sharp, not controlled. It was small. Elise's voice was never small. I am coming in. The sound of something glass being set down. Fine. I opened the door to lamplight and the faint sweetness of whatever had been in that vial. Elise stood in front of the tall mirror in a light sleeping gown, her arms crossed over her chest, her face turned halfway toward me and halfway toward her own reflection. The potion had not worked. The empty vial sat on the dresser next to the lamp, tipped on its side. I closed the door behind me and leaned against the frame. It was supposed to work. Her voice held steady for exactly that sentence. She said it was from the royal treasury, ancient, 1 dose for visible results. A breath. She was wrong, or I was too far gone for it to matter. Elise, do not say it does not matter. She turned to face me fully, eyes bright and wet and furious in the way that meant the fury was pointed inward. I know what I look like, Ethan. I have known for 300 years. The potion was supposed to change that, and it did not. And I need to know. Her jaw worked. Watching her composure crack was like watching a load-bearing wall develop fractures. I need to know if it matters to you. The truth, not kindness, not your usual. She waved one hand vaguely at all of me. Just the truth. She was crying, not dramatically, not with sound. The tears ran straight down and she did not wipe them. She stood there in lamplight with her arms at her sides and let me see her without any defense at all. This was not about the potion. 300 years of being the flat-chested one in every room, every party, every mirror. The potion was just the last door, and it had not opened, and now there were no more doors. She was standing there asking for the truth, and she was crying, and I have never been able to watch something hurt and not reach for the repair. I stepped away from the doorframe. Sit down, I said. I need to explain something, and I need you to actually hear it. She sat on the edge of the bed. I pulled the chair from the writing desk, set it in front of her, and sat down. The lamplight caught the tracks on her face. Her pointed ears were backlit against the amber glow. I had supplied enough mana for 100 consecutive explosions. This was harder. When I fixed that barrier device in the throne room, I began, and my voice came out quieter than I intended. I spent about 40 seconds analyzing its internal architecture before I touched anything. You know why it worked? worked because every component inside that device was exactly the right size. Not bigger than it needed to be, not smaller, exactly right. The crystal housing, the monoconduits, the frame joints. If any single piece had been larger, the balance would have collapsed. The whole system worked because nothing was wasted. I looked at her. She was watching me with wet eyes and an expression I could not read, which meant she was listening so hard she had forgotten to compose her face. That is how I see you. The words came out before the professional filter could catch them. I kept going because stopping now would be worse. Your frame, your proportions, your lines. When I look at you with analysis active, which happens more often than I will ever comfortably admit, what I see is a system in perfect balance. Your speed in the dungeon, the way you pivot on a half step when the formation shifts, the precision of your mana channeling. None of that works if your center of gravity is different. None of that works if your frame is carrying mass it was not designed for. You are built the way a masterwork tool is built. Every element is exactly where it should be, doing exactly what it should do, with zero waste. The potion not working is not a failure, I said. Your body rejected an alteration that would have compromised a perfect design. That is not a flaw, Elise. That is structural integrity. She had stopped crying. She was staring at me the way she stared at battlefield maps when a new variable changed everything. I should have stopped there. A smarter man would have stopped there. But the momentum was carrying me now, the same way it carried me through a mana depletion cycle, all the way to the bottom. I have been looking at you since the first week we formed this party. Not at what you think is missing, at what is there. The way your silhouette moves against torchlight underground. The way your sleeping gown fits you right now. The way the fabric falls in clean lines because there is nothing to interrupt them. I have evaluated thousands of pieces of equipment and materials and structures in my career. And you, I exhaled. You are the most perfectly proportioned thing I have ever seen. And I mean that in every sense of the word. Silence. The lamp flickered. Somewhere down the hall, a clock marked the hour in soft chimes. Elise's lower lip trembled. You, her voice cracked. You absolute fool. She was crying again, differently. Her face crumpled the way faces crumple when something clenched for a very long time finally lets go. And the sound she made was not sadness. It was relief. You have been thinking that since the first week? I try not to, I said, because honesty was apparently all I had left. She laughed through the tears. Then let me stay like this. She pulled her hands away. Her eyes were red and shining with something that looked like the moment a fracture heals over. If you say this is how I am supposed to be, then I believe you. Your hands and your eyes have never been wrong about anything you have built or fixed or evaluated. I am choosing to trust them now. She stood up, stepped forward, and put her arms around me with a grip significantly stronger than her frame suggested. Her face pressed into my chest, and she held on like I was the last solid structure in the world. I put one hand on her back and said nothing, because for once, the thing that needed fixing had been fixed by telling the truth instead of reaching for a tool. Do not let go, she said into my shirt. Not tonight. I forbid it. Elise, my hands are already in a compromising position, and my ability to maintain appropriate boundaries is approximately, I did the math, 5 minutes from total collapse. Good, she tightened her grip. Suffer. 5 minutes turned out to be optimistic. I was on minute 3, Elise's arms locked around my neck, when the door opened without a knock. Elise, I heard crying, and I swear, if he made you... Serena stopped in the doorway. She took in the scene. Her expression shifted from alarm to something softer, then settled on the look she wore when she had been outmaneuvered and was deciding whether to be angry about it. Behind her, Mira's wolf ears appeared over her shoulder, swiveled forward. Is boss hugging Elise? Without yes? This is a private moment, I said, with as much authority as a man can project while being clung to by a teary-eyed elf. It was private, Serena stepped in. It is a group event now. Mira did not wait for the debate. She crossed the room in 3 strides and attached herself to my left side, arms around my waist, tail around my leg, body heat that could have powered a small forge. Serena approached from the right with more composure and approximately the same result. Elise on my front, Mira on my left, Serena on my right. The total combined pressure on my circulatory system was something no amount of mana pool training had prepared me for. Ladies, the human male body has operational limits, and I am exceeding approximately all of them. Stop being dramatic and enjoy it. Serena's voice was at my ear, warm breath on skin. Boss smells so good up close. Mira nuzzled my neck. Her ears brushed my jaw. Elise lifted her face just long enough to look at me with tear-stained cheeks and a faint, victorious smile. I told you, I am not letting go tonight. The room went white, not metaphorically. The sensory input from 3 directions simultaneously exceeded the processing capacity of my nervous system in a way that no dungeon boss, no stampede, no ancient device had ever accomplished. My last coherent thought was that this was how I died, not in combat, sandwiched by my own party in a guest bedroom in the royal capital. Then everything went dark, morning light through unfamiliar curtains. I opened my eyes to a painted ceiling, cherubs, a meadow, nothing like any dungeon I had ever been in. For 3 seconds, I let myself believe it had all been a dream. It was not a dream. Elise's voice, calm and amused and devastating. And before you ask, the answer is also not a dream. I turned my head. All 3 of them, arranged around the bed with the casual permanence of people who had been awake for an hour and decided that watching me sleep was a reasonable use of their morning. Elise sat against the headboard with a cup of tea, her eyes still faintly pink from last night, but her composure rebuilt into something warmer than the old version. Serena occupied a chair at the bedside, sipping from her own cup with the satisfied expression of a woman who had gotten exactly what she wanted. Mira was cross-legged at the foot of the bed, tail swaying, grinning at me with the pure, uncomplicated joy of a sunbeam. I pulled the blanket over my head. "He is hiding," Mira observed, delighted. "Let him." Elise's voice carried something new. Not the old sharp control, something steadier, softer at the edges. "He earned it." Through the blanket, I heard footsteps in the hallway, light ones. The cadence of someone trying to walk quietly and failing. A pause at the door. "Is my brother still under there?" Clara. "Of course." "About a minute now," Serena reported. "We are giving him space." "No, you are not," I said from under the blanket. My sister's laugh was quiet and completely unsurprised. She had been waiting for this. The day her brother finally said something real and then immediately tried to disappear. "Sounds like he is fine. I will bring more tea." The door closed. The footsteps retreated, lighter this time, with the rhythm of someone who was very happy about something. Under the blanket, surrounded by morning light I could not see, and the quiet sounds of 3 women who were not going anywhere, I did something I had not done since before the expulsion. I stayed. Not because staying was strategic or efficient or the choice that maximized anyone's level up potential. I stayed because the dark under the blanket was warm, and the room beyond it was warm, and for the first time in longer than I could calculate, the warmth was not something I needed to fix or supply or maintain for someone else. It was just there, and it was enough. I woke before the sun. The heroines were asleep. Serena's breathing 2 doors down, deep and rhythmic. Mira's tail thumping a wall she kept rolling into. Elise's room silent, which meant she was either sleeping or tactically analyzing the ceiling. The plan had formed around 2 in the morning while I was pretending to sleep. Slip out while the kitchen debate about my breakfast consumed their attention. Blend into the morning market crowd, using every dungeon survival instinct I had spent 20 years sharpening. Reach the guild. Drop the cursed stone intelligence in an anonymous report with handwriting nobody could trace, and leave the capital before anyone could promote me, marry me to a princess, or hand me another title I did not want. I rolled out of bed without making the frame creak. Dark trousers, a commoner's cloak from my spatial bag, the kind that smelled like hay and market smoke, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. My stealth skill blurred my presence. A thread of shadow magic bent my outline into the corridor's dark. The back door opened without a sound. I had oiled that hinge 2 days ago during what the staff assumed was idle maintenance. Pre-dawn air hit my face, and I felt something I had not felt since walking out of the guild hall in Herafutin. Freedom, the kind that lasts about 30 seconds. The market was already stirring. Vendors hauled crates. Cartwheels ground cobblestone. I walked slightly hunched, stride shortened, matching the pace of the heaviest loaded man near me. The guild building appeared at the end of the boulevard, 60 steps to freedom. Then my detection skill lit up like a bonfire. 4 signatures, closing from 4 directions. Well, Elise stepped from behind a column at the guild entrance, arms folded. That took longer than I expected. Mira appeared around a bread stall, grinning the way a wolf grins at a rabbit that has just run into the den. Serena closed the alley to my right without looking rushed. and from the left came Louise in a formal dress, holding a small compass-like instrument that pulsed with a light I recognized. My magical frequency, captured from the residual mana I had used repairing the ancient device, turned into a tracking tool. My own craftsmanship turned into the net that caught me. "You built a radar out of my repair work," I said. Louise's fan fluttered. The princess confirmed, through that insufferable composure, that the device had been her idea. I looked at Elise, at Mira, at Serena, at the princess who had weaponized my own mana against me. I sank to my knees on the cobblestone, a craftsman defeated by his own craft. Passers-by were already whispering something about the new Baron and his beautiful wives and how lucky he was. The word lucky landed like a brick on wet clay. My escape technique against 4 women who have memorized my shoulder posture, my route preferences, and my magical fingerprint. I stared at the cobblestones. "I never stood a chance, did I?" "You really did not," Elise confirmed, and took my arm. Being escorted through the capital by 4 women was an experience I would not recommend. Elise and Serena flanked me close enough that my elbows could not move without contacting someone. Mira walked behind me with the cheerful vigilance of a sheepdog. Louise walked ahead, her fan positioned at an angle that told every guard in visual range that the man being marched through the street was under royal supervision and should not be helped. I was running calculations about whether feigning sudden illness might buy me a few hours when the universe decided my problems were not interesting enough. A vegetable cart came barreling around the corner, moving too fast for the turn. Serena pulled me toward the wall. The others followed. A hooded man from the opposite direction dove into the same narrow space. Our shoulders collided, a fraction of a second of contact. Every hair on my body stood straight, not magical detection. Something older, 20 years in the deepest layers of the Felwy labyrinth, had taught me what the air tasted like near things that should not walk above ground. This man tasted like that. Something heavy had fallen from inside his cloak, a bundle in black cloth, roughly fist-sized, hitting the cobblestones with a weight that did not match its size. My appraisal returned nothing useful. The system said he was nobody. The system was wrong. My hands remembered the exact frequency of the cursed stone fragment from the stampede in Herafutin. The pulse coming through the black cloth was the same frequency, stronger, purer, much worse. I picked up the bundle. "Excuse me, you dropped something." I caught Elise's eyes, then Serena's, then Mira's. The look I gave them was not the lazy handyman's look. It was the deepest floor look, the one that meant someone was going to die, and it needed to not be us. They understood instantly. Serena sealed the alley exit. Mira ghosted to his blind side. Elise locked the ambient mana around us rigid. I channeled raw mana into the bundle, bypassing the system entirely. What I found was a cursed berserk stone of a purity I had never seen. The fragment from Herafutin had been a splinter. This was the real thing. My right hand was already inside my spatial bag. The orichalcum blade came out faster than the eye could track. The tip stopped a finger's width from his throat. "Saved me the trouble of looking," I said. My voice was not the voice of a man who complained about marriage politics. With my free hand, I ripped the cloth away. The stone spilled into morning light, black and red, and pulsing like a diseased heart. It drank the sunlight. It made the bones in your chest vibrate. The street went quiet. "You are carrying the thing that turns cities into graveyards." I let the blade press closer, dropped the disguise. The man stared for 3 seconds. Then his smile stretched wider than a human mouth should go. He laughed. His skin peeled away like mud, sliding off stone, dissolving into black vapor. What stood in its place was tall, gray-skinned, with twisted horns and furnace-slit eyes. A demon. In the capital's main street, broad daylight. He told me, through that impossible grin, that the stone was a gift, that this was only a piece of what was coming. Serena lunged. Mira struck from the flank. Both hit smoke. The cobblestones under his feet turned liquid black and swallowed him downward. My blade cut through the space where his neck had been and severed nothing. "Subterranean transit," I spat. "He passed through the bedrock. I cannot follow that." The alley was empty. The demon was gone. The only thing he left behind was the cursed stone, still pulsing in the open air. Then the ground began to shake. Elise understood first. The capital's defensive barriers were anchored to the bedrock. Something beneath us was tearing through those anchors from below. The stone was a detonator. The real weapon had been planted under the capital long before today. The central plaza erupted. Cobblestones blew upward, and through the rain of shattered stone, something climbed out. An arm first, wider than a house, made of compressed bedrock and glowing veins of magma. Then shoulders that cleared 4-story rooflines. A golem variant, deep earth class, fueled by the ley lines beneath the city. Smaller monsters poured from the fissures. People ran. The screaming was a wall of sound. Clara's school was north. The residential district where families with children lived was northeast. The golem stood between all of those things and the people trying to run. I took one breath. The man who wanted a slow life stood in a destroyed plaza, holding a blade he had forged in the deepest forge he had ever found, surrounded by the best people he had ever known, and looked up at something that could destroy this city. The escape plan was gone. The commoner's cloak was a joke. There was only the job. And for the first time since the expulsion, I did not pretend there was someone else who should be doing it. Bram came through the dust at a sprint, greatsword already wreathed in fire magic. Lahi was half a step behind, detection sweeping the field. "What do you need?" Bram shouted. I pointed. The part of me that hid behind other people went dark. What replaced it was 20 years of operational architecture. "Lahi, civilian evacuation, north and northeast corridors. Find anyone trapped." She was already moving. "Bram, medium-tier monsters in the east block. The guild's rankers are holding the west, but the east is open. Do not hold back." He wanted the golem. I could see it. But he looked at my face and went. "Elise, track the golem's structure in real time. Joints, magma flows, core location." Her eyes were already glowing. "Central chest cavity, 12 layers of compressed bedrock." "Serena, flanking interdiction. If it turns towards civilians, you slow it. Save your lightning for my signal." "Mira, front line. Make it swing at you instead of buildings." Her tail went rigid. "I have been waiting for this." She launched forward. The cobblestones cracked where she pushed off. Mira hit the golem's shin and the impact sounded like a cannon shot. The construct staggered. When she hit it again, the golem committed its arm to a downward sweep. She dodged. The arm carved a trench across the plaza, but the golem's right side was overcommitted. I activated earth, fire, and wind magic simultaneously through my amplification bracelets. The ground beneath the golem liquefied into superheated slag. It sank 3 feet, and the molten stone cooled around its legs. But the magma-born construct was heat-resistant. Fire against fire was drowning a fish. "Thermal shock," I called. "Crack it open." "Water magic, full output," Elise responded. "Lahi, synchronize." Across the plaza, Lahi's voice carried. "Synchronizing. On your mark. Now." Twin torrents struck the superheated surface. The temperature differential was catastrophic. Steam erupted. The sound was a sustained shriek of fracturing stone. When it cleared, the golem's armor was webbed with cracks, still standing, but no longer invulnerable. "Everyone heard that," I said. "We end this now." Elise drove crystalline lances into every crack, freezing the moisture inside. Expanding ice widened the fissures from within. Mira's fist cratered the weakened right knee. The joint shattered. The construct listed sideways, balance gone. Bram's voice cut through the steam. He had finished the medium-tier monsters faster than I expected. "Boss, finest opening you have ever given me." His blade cleaved the crumbling shoulder. Fire magic level 10 cauterized the wound so it could not reform. The golem swayed, dying, one arm reaching toward the residential block in a last reflexive gesture. "Serena, now." Lightning derivative wind magic, level 5. The bolt struck the exposed core through the chest fissure. White light. A sound I had no word for. The golem stopped, frozen mid-reach. Every magma vein dark. Then it fell, away from the residential block, toward the destroyed plaza center. The dust cloud that rose blotted out the sun. Silence. The bruised kind that follows catastrophe, where every ear is still ringing. Bram stood in the rubble, panting. Lahi checked him for injuries. Civilian corridors clear. Over 300 evacuated from the northeast alone. 300 lives. Because I told her where to go, and she went. Elise lowered her staff. Her hands were shaking. Serena sheathed her sword through training discipline, alone. Mira walked out of the dust cloud with a limp she was trying to hide, and a grin she was not. "Boss?" She flexed her bruised hand. "Best fight I have ever been in. I had built this. Not the golem, not the victory, the team, the coordination, the trust that let me say a name and a direction and know it would be done before I finished speaking. You did well," I said. It was not enough. It was never enough, but it was what I had. And from the way their faces changed, it was what they needed. Around us, civilians emerged from sheltered corridors, staring at the rubble pile where a monster had stood. Somewhere in the distance, the guild's emergency bells were ringing late. The capital's own defenders were arriving to a fight that was already over. I sat down on a chunk of broken cobblestone and rested the orichalcum blade across my knees. Mana drained, muscles finished. The slow life was never going to happen, and I had known that for a while. But sitting in the rubble surrounded by the people who made it impossible, with dust settling on my shoulders and a rescued city starting to breathe again, the knowing did not sting the way it used to. Nobody noticed the wagon. It moved along the edge of the plaza at the pace of any merchant cart leaving the market early. The driver sat hunched, hood drawn low. As the wagon rounded the corner, the driver glanced back once. Through the settling dust, the destroyed golem's remains were visible. The cheering had started. The adventurers who had killed it stood at the center. One of them, a man in a dusty cloak, holding a silver blade, sat on rubble with his head tipped back and his eyes closed. The driver's mouth moved, words too quiet for anyone to hear. A sentence that ended with the kind of smile that belonged on someone watching a test subject perform exactly as predicted. The wagon turned the corner and disappeared into the capital's traffic. Ethan did not see it. None of them did. Whatever had just been confirmed, whatever plan had just advanced by one step, the people who had saved the capital would not learn about it today. The throne room smelled like polished stone and old decisions. I stood in the center of it and rehearsed the logic one last time. The cursed artifact, my hand on it. That contact activated the berserk stone. The stone triggered the golem. The golem destroyed half the central plaza. The guilt was real, but underneath it, a plan had formed. If the king accepted my culpability, he would have to strip my title. A baron who caused a golem attack could not remain a baron. No more noble obligations. No more princess. All I had to do was tell the truth and let the truth do the work. So I bowed and told them everything. The collision, the confrontation, the chain of events I set in motion by grabbing a demon instead of reporting him quietly. I failed to contain the threat without collateral damage, I said. I respectfully request that the barony be revoked. Silence, the kind with weight. Then Louise stepped forward. The princess reframed every point with the kind of passion that could fill a parade ground. The collision was not recklessness. It was the only person in the capital capable of detecting a disguised demon. The golem battle was not collateral damage. It was a coordinated defense with 0 fatalities. My request to resign was proof I held no interest in power, which made me the safest person to give it to. The king nodded. He would not accept my resignation. In recognition of my heroism, he was elevating my rank. The court erupted in applause. Through the doors at the back, I caught a glimpse of Elise and the others. Elise's expression was calm and unsurprised. Serena looked quietly pleased. Mira was grinning so wide her ears trembled. They had known. All of them had watched me walk in with my resignation speech and known exactly how it would end. I stood in the center of the throne room, freshly promoted, and felt the last door to my slow life close with a sound like polished marble meeting polished marble. Quiet, final, perfectly built. 2 days after the promotion, I did what I always did when the world gave me something I did not want. I went to work. Elise got the excuse about important reconstruction duties. My tools were packed before dawn. The servant's entrance let me out without a sound. The Eastern District was where the golem's arm had hit hardest. My appraisal skill confirmed the foundations were cracked to bedrock. Patch the surface and the whole block would collapse within a year. So I started at the bottom. Earth magic loosened the damaged substrate. Construction magic rebuilt from bedrock up. My amplification bracelets fed enough power into the level 1 spells to make the professional masons stare. 5 minutes per building foundation. The crews had estimated a week. I moved block by block. Cracked water channels, tilted pillars, shattered walls. The level 1 skills were not impressive individually. Combined, they were an industrial repair system in one body. This was who I was when nobody was watching. There was a broken thing, and I could fix it. That was enough. By midday, I had cleared 6 blocks. The work felt good. Hands on stone, magic in the ground. The quiet satisfaction of watching something broken become whole. Late afternoon, the central plaza, the crater. It sat in the middle of the plaza, like a wound that refused to close, wide enough to swallow a building, deep enough that the bottom disappeared into shadow. The repair crews stood around it with the expressions of men asked to fill a lake with a teaspoon. My appraisal skill reached into the darkness. Rock, compressed sediment, and underneath it all, heat. Not residual from the golem, something deeper, with pressure behind it. If there was a thermal pocket under the capital, leaving it alone was not an option. I told the crews to clear the area and dropped in. Earth magic loosened the rock. Construction magic reinforced the shaft walls as I descended. My spatial bag swallowed the excavated material without a particle of dust reaching the surface. Same technique I used to mine mithril in the deep layers of the Felwy labyrinth. The temperature climbed. Condensation formed on my lantern. My appraisal readings showed an enormous pocket of pressurized liquid behind volcanic caprock. I carved a hairline fracture, a controlled vent. The crack was supposed to be small. A column of hot water hit me from below with enough force to launch me straight up the shaft, dozens of feet underground to the surface in 2 seconds, riding a geyser that erupted from the crater like a fountain designed by a man with no sense of proportion. The cobblestones caught me, soaking wet, steaming, and completely uninjured. My magical resistance dampened the heat. Construction magic cushioned the impact. My dignity had no defensive skills whatsoever. Sulfur, clean, sharp, unmistakable. The smell hit while I lay on the warm stone staring at the sky. The adventurers were already running toward me when I sat up, dripping. "Fine," I said, before anyone could ask. "It is a hot spring." "A what?" The heat source was not magma. Natural thermal reservoir. I wrung out my sleeve. High sulfur content. Good mineral balance. One of them processed this slowly. "So the dangerous underground heat source is a bath. A very good bath." Louise arrived with the royal inspection party. The princess took one look at the geyser, one look at me sitting in a puddle, and asked what exactly I had done. I explained. She was quiet for a moment. I saw the edge of her mouth. She was fighting something. Elise appeared behind the royal party, then Serena, then Mira, who said the first thing that came to mind. "Can we use it?" Serena put a hand over her face. Elise's expression meant she was already calculating flow rates. "The water pressure is sustainable. This could supply a full public facility." "That is what I was thinking," I said from the ground. "You were thinking about public utilities while sitting in a puddle." I was multitasking. The next hour went to what I did best. Earth magic reshaped the crater into a controlled basin. Construction magic built channel walls and drainage paths. By the time the sun started dropping, the central plaza had gone from a war wound to the beginning of a public bath. I sat on the stone rim, feet in the water, tools beside me, suit ruined, bracelets drained, too tired to stand and too stubborn to admit it. Mira sat down next to me and put her feet in the water. Her ears twitched at the heat, then relaxed. "This is nice." Serena settled on my other side with the precision of a woman who refused to look undignified even with her shoes off. She tested the water. "The mineral content is remarkable. My family's estate had a private spring. This is better." Elise stood behind me. Her hand rested on my shoulder. Light, brief. She did not say anything. The water caught the golden light. The steam curled upward. 3 women who had followed me from Herafutin through dungeons and stampedes and noble politics and a golem attack were sitting in a hot spring I had accidentally built in the middle of a war crater. The slow life I wanted was gone. It had been gone since the day Elise studied my nightly training through a gap in a tent flap and decided I was worth understanding. Every plan I made to escape had been answered by someone choosing to stay. Every door I tried to close had been held open by someone who refused to let me disappear. This story started with me wanting nothing. It was ending with me unable to stop giving everything. A title I tried to resign. 3 women I tried to keep at arm's length. A princess I tried to outrun. A disciple who declared himself. A quiet girl who asked to join. And now a hot spring erupting from a demon's crater because even the ground under my feet could not stop giving me things. The demon was still out there. The shadow in the wagon was still watching. The story was not finished. But right now, the water was warm. Mira's tail swished lazy arcs beside me. Somewhere in the eastern district, a wall I rebuilt that morning was holding up a roof that would keep a family dry tonight. A handyman. That was what I had always been. The title changed. The job was the same. Find what is broken. Fix it. Move on to the next thing. The slow life never had a chance. My eyes closed. The water did its work. Tomorrow would probably be worse. But tonight, the temperature was perfect.